Chapter 151. Round Up. Chapter 151. Round Up. The Tudolong Banner was located in the eastern mountain ranges of the Hongyan Mountains. It was to the northwest of the Shai camp, and leading directly east of was the Biancha 12 tribes. Before this year, it was not a place of contention for both sides, but with Li Bei's repeatedly retreating battlefront, this place became a strategic point above the battleground. Huhilu's squad broke through the checkpoints and watchtowers ahead, so Changzhou camp could only confront them on the west side of the Tudolong Banner. Both sides often engage in slanging matches across the marshland of the Tudolong Banner. Xiao Qia took a detour from the Bianbua camp, which just so happened to put him to the south of Changzhou camp. But the collapse blocked off the bridle path leading right to Changzhou camp, and the Tudolong Banner lay just to the right. Hassan's squad often wandered around this area. If Xiao Qia refused to abandon the grains to extricate himself, then he could only come face to face with Hassan with the supplies in tow. However, the grain wagons were too heavy. Wu Ziyu's armored cavalry could not run on mud, and the Imperial Army did not have enough light cavalry to interfere. Under such circumstances, it was simply too dangerous to turn around and head for the Tudolong Banner. Wu Ziyu wanted to refute, but Chen Yang and the rest had already turned their horses around. That was a kind of trust that could not be described with words alone. They unconditionally obeyed Xiao Qia. Even if it was a critical moment of life and death right this moment, they could immediately carry it out, as long as it was Xiao Qia's commands. Wu Ziyu, who stood among them, involuntarily shuddered. It was now 1/4 the hour of Shun, and the sky was overcast, having been affected by the rainstorm. Gu Jin was well acquainted with this area, and the convoy squad entered Tudolong Banner. The grain wagons rolled heavily across the mudholes. Just a little oversight and they would sink in them. Everyone stilled their breathing and focused with rapt attention, not daring to be sloppy in the slightest. Xiao Qia wanted to conceal the grain wagons here. No matter how brave the cavalry of Biancha was, they would not enter the Tudolong Banner rashly. The marshland was similarly a difficult place for them to navigate. Besides, rainy days affected not just Xiao Qia, but Hassan as well. Meng's inability to do reconnaissance meant that the Saker falcons were not able to either. Both sides could not get a clear look at the other party's movements through the rainstorm. They could only rely on their knowledge of the battlefield to make their moves against each other. But this kind of delicate balance could only be maintained in the rainstorm. Once the rain stopped, Xiao Qia's current squad would not be able to withstand Hassan's assault. Wu Ziyu, stay to guard over the grain wagons, Xiao Qia said rapidly. Let the armored cavalry hang up the chains to surround the grain wagons. The paths around the Tudolong Banner were all muddy, and the armored cavalry were too heavy on rainy days. It was easy for the horses' hooves to get bogged down in the mud, so staying behind to watch over the grain wagons was the most appropriate decision to make. The chains were something Xiao Fengshu had them equipped with. Hooked them on the armors, and they could turn the armored cavalry into the grain wagons' armor. That way, even if Hassan could break through Xiao Qia's guerrilla attack and enter the inner area of the Tudolong Banner, he would still be unable to break up the iron wall of the armored cavalry right at once. Xiao Qia remained in place and said to the Imperial Army, Hassan is leading the Hanshi tribe. Their speed is fast, and their strikes are powerful. We can't catch up to them or stop them. But the east side where they are located is overgrown with bushes, which makes it easy for us to hide. The Saker Falcon can't go ahead with their patrols on rainy days. This is an opportunity. It was clear who was the stronger and weaker one between the enemy and them. Xiao Qia could not let Hassan's squad remain intact. He would have no chance of winning if that was the case. He had the Imperial Army split up into small groups to feel their way out of the Tudolong Banner's marshland, set up ropes to trip the enemy's horses, then similarly break up and divert the unsuspecting Biancha cavalry all over the Tudolong Banner. As long as the Biancha cavalry fell off their horses, they would lose their advantage. Gu Jin should bypass Hassan's squad and rush over to the battlefield at top speed. Xiao Qie turned around and looked at Gu Jin. Zhao Hui didn't come, and that means the 3 great training divisions of Luoyang are unable to move at this moment. The war situation further north is likely to be more dire than we thought. We can only now ask the battleground for reinforcements. Ji Jin had been injured before in the Tudalong banner. He knew the roads of the Tudalong banner by heart. He promptly voiced an acknowledgement and led a row of lightly equipped scouts on ahead. Lao Hu, head northeast. I'll go to the east. Chen Yang, assume personal command here. As Xiao Qie spoke, he strode forward. No matter what, we have to ensure the army provisions can be successfully delivered to the site of battle. Having followed Xiao Qie bustle all over the place, Chen Yang knew best about the status of the various granaries reserves in Libei. If Xiao Qie were defeated, then Chen Yang would have to release a falcon once the rain stopped to inform the Northeast Provisions bridle path to reallocate army provisions up north without further delay. As the convoy squad, their lives and deaths were nowhere near as important as the army provisions for the battlegrounds. This place was close to Hongyan Mountains. The rain would not be stopping anytime soon. The Imperial Army who was lying low in the mudholes had to endure the bone-chilling cold. Their inner garment clung to their skin, having already been drenched through. All their limbs had to be soaked in the mud, and it took less than an hour for all their fingers and toes to be frozen. The autumnal rains of Libei were like blades. August had barely begun, yet the temperature had already dropped so low it appeared snow might fall any moment. The convoy squad had yet to change into outer coats to keep out the cold. Long before heading out, Xiao Qie had already asked that they switch the water they carried on hand with on horseback. One strong wine could dispel the cold, and thus it was a pivotal item to have in this frontier of capricious wind and snow. Xiao Qie crouched in a mudhole and chugged down the wine, one mouthful at a time. For the most part, the battle between Libei and Biantia would not drag past the 8th or 9th month, as a further delay meant the coming of snow, where the grasslands of both parties would be ravaged by raging snowstorms. During the long and harsh winter, groups of Libei's military craftsmen would spend this time tirelessly reforging and repairing equipment for the armored cavalry. On the other end, Biantia would herd their flocks of sheep closer to the south. Everyone would spontaneously enter a period of truce without fail. It was only during the 3rd year of the reign of Xianda that something unforeseen had happened. Then, the Hanshi tribe headed south and breached the banks of Chaosha River to relieve considerable pressure on the provisions for the 12 tribes of Biantia. For some reason, in the past couple of days, Xiao Qie had a premonition that there would be no truce this winter. Amuer's combat style was too aggressive. If what Amuer had done in early spring was to enter his enemy's territory to plunder food, then right now, Amuer seemed more like he was full-on suppressing Libei with no intention of retreat. By transferring Hassan over here from Qidong, Amuer was deploying and letting loose his most powerful troops on the battlefields of Libei, which were completely unlike the small-scaled battles and skirmishes they had engaged in during the last few years. All of a sudden, the sound of horse hooves rose through the rain. Xiao Qie hung back his flask and held up 2 fingers to signal for the Imperial army behind him to get down. He crouched down, his face almost touching the mudhole, and used only his eyes to search the bushes in the rain. A troop of cavalrymen appeared amidst the pouring rain, the hooves of their horses splashing muddy water all over as they galloped. Xiao Qie silently observed them, and Longli blade gradually slid out of its sheath as the distance between them shortened. The sound of horse hooves intensified, while the sound of the Biantia cavalry's whistle dispersed in the rain. Xiao Qie had already felt a slight tremor with the palm he had pressed against the ground. He did not move, and neither did the Imperial army behind him. The Biantia cavalry was just right before them. Just a couple steps more, and they would be trampling over the Imperial army. But then, the horse in the lead suddenly neighed, its front hooves caught by the rope. The horse's front knees protruded forward, and it fell straight down. A wave of mud instantly splashed over Xiao Qia's face. He moved. At the same time the cavalryman fell down along with the horse. Longly blade had already broken free of its sheath. Xiao Qia cleaved down at the man. Fresh blood that spewed from the neck of the man gushed into the mudhole. The cavalrymen behind the man were caught off guard, and consequently, their formation was thrown into disarray. Xiao Qia did not give the other party the chance to regroup. The imperial army followed him closely as he killed his way into the Biancha cavalry. A blend of mud and blood trickled onto Xiao Qia's nape. The pungency of on horseback flooded through his stomach, causing him to burn up all over. This was like a head-on blow that swiftly sent the Biancha cavalry gathering their wits about them. Both parties were small squads, fighting at close quarters and killing one another as the rainwater poured over them. But it was a quick battle. By the time the Biancha cavalry pulled themselves together, the imperial army had soundlessly vanished into the torrential rain again. The Biancha cavalry's squads set up around the Tudolong banner all received varying degrees of assaults from the imperial army. As soon as they tried to follow up with an attack, these batches of ruffian soldiers would shrink back in retreat. The Biancha cavalry was forced to come to a halt beyond the marshland of the Tudolong banner. Whenever they wanted to turn back and rejoin the others, the imperial army would sneak up on them and attack. After a few times, the Biancha cavalry was beyond fed up. They could not use their speed to full advantage, and their charges were all over the place. They were just like headless flies being harassed by the imperial army, who shoved and kicked them. Pent-up rage simmered in them as they fought with ire and resentment. Xiao Qia was hidden under the torrential rain all this time. The Biancha cavalry could not make out the exact hiding place of the imperial army at all. Without the heavy armors and horses of the Libe armored cavalry, the imperial army could disappear from the Biancha cavalry's field of vision as long as they lie low on the ground, coming and going elusively like a shadow. Very quickly, Xiao Qia's wine was drunk down to the last drop. At the hour of Su, the sky grew completely dark. The Biancha cavalry was still trapped by the imperial army at the fringe of the Tudolong banner, unable to advance or retreat. Chances of victory kept improving. It seemed as if Xiao Qia had grasped the rhythm of the battle. He would not let it go to his head. It did not matter if the Biancha cavalry showed weakness or resorted to intimidation, the rhythm remained firmly in his control. But time lapsed, and Xiao Qia still had yet to catch sight of Hassan. The chill was even more intense in the night, and it was incomparably pitch dark all around. Xiao Qia's boots were choked full of mud. Rainy days were wet and slippery. In order to prevent his blade from slipping off his hand, Xiao Qia had it bound to the area between his thumb and index finger with a strip of cloth. At this point, the cloth was soaked through and utterly waterlogged. He squatted in place and tore away the old one to replace it with a new one. Man's physical strength was limited. This kind of back-and-forth battle required both sides to be on high alert at all times. Nerves had to be stretched taut. They could not afford to make even the slightest oversight or negligence. But Xiao Qia had to catch his breath too. He closed his eyes slightly and shook his head twice, so that he would not go numb from the repetitive actions. By tomorrow latest at the hour of Qin, the reinforcements from the battlegrounds would have hurried their way over. Tonight was of crucial importance. But heaven still favored Xiao Qia. Even if the rain were to abate some, there would be no starlight and moonlight tonight. The night was still as the imperial army's disguise. Xiao Qia huffed out warm air and flexed his 5 fingers before tightening his grip on Longly blade. But just as he rose to his feet again, the sound of disorderly footsteps rang out from the shrubbery. The person who brushed aside the leaves to reveal himself turned out to be Gu Jin. Xiao Qia promptly had an ill sense of foreboding. Sure enough, he saw Gu Jin looking grim as he hastily kneeled on one knee and whispered, "Master, the roads to the site of battle are all blocked. Hassan's elite forces are right at the southeast, and they have cut off my access." Xiao Qia's heart suddenly sank. It hit him almost instantly. He had walked into a trap. Every skilled commanding general knows the principle of imposing his will on the enemy but not allowing the enemy's will to be imposed on him. The reason Shao Qie had been scoring one victory after another from Kudu was that he was always taking the initiative. This allowed him to control the pulse and rhythm of the battlefield without fear of the enemy's numbers. But he had forgotten that Hassan was the same kind of commanding general as he was. This reign was no coincidence. It was a meticulously planned roundup. From the time Shao Qie's squad headed north, Hassan had already laid down an encirclement trap to hunt and kill this wolf pup. At the same time Shao Qie was watching the Biancha cavalry, he was also being observed by Hassan. Shao Qie thought he was taking the initiative, but he was, in fact, paralyzing himself. Right from the moment he decided to turn around and head for the Tudalong banner, he had already fallen into the role of the passive player. The sound of horses' hooves rose once more. Chapter 152. Hassan. Chapter 152. Hassan. Raindrops rolled down the curved blade, dripping along its sharp edge. The horse under Hassan was snorting hot puffs of air. Hassan had already been waiting for a long time in the rain. It was 3/4 past the hour of high. The world had completely descended into darkness. Hassan had a head full of red hair. He was not like the men of Dazhou, who typically tied their hair up in a bun. Instead, he had it trimmed short, with a small pigtail tied at the back of his head. After Huhilu's death, Bayan was transferred over to Hassan's side. He tugged at the reins as he followed behind Hassan and wrapped up his treasured military books before putting them back under his robe on his bosom. Cautiously, he asked, "How are you certain he will not escape?" Hassan scratched at his rain-drenched hair, letting it pile up in a mess as he replied. He was very bold when fighting Huhilu. To put it in the words of those from Dazhou, he is adept in the art of deception. I heard that he's the youngest son of the Prince of Libei, a wolf pup. As long as there's a chance to counterattack, he'll definitely not choose to flee. Bayan said, "He's indeed very bold and also very cautious. Compared to his elder brother, Shao Qie is an impulsive man." Hassan, having said to this point, was a little bashful. "Even though I'm no genius, I know the pride of a genius. No matter how he warns himself, he will still lose a little of his prudence after defeating our powerful Huhilu at the Shasan camp. His desire to win is too strong. Bayan, even I can feel it. Like my father, he won't allow himself to cower and retreat. This is his strength, but also his weakness." Bayan quietly petted the horse. "Will we win?" "We will definitely win." When he said this, his eyes were bright and his words powerful. "He can't beat me." Hassan and Shao Qie had similar combat styles, with the way they fought their battles both wild and unrestrained. Both Qi Juin and Lu Guangbai had been put through the ringer at his hands one after another, but he and Shao Qie were polar opposites in terms of their personalities. He was introverted and even a little bashful. The beautiful maidens of the Biancha 12 tribes all had their eyes on him, yet just their gazes alone would make him go red in the face. He was Emuer's favorite son, and this was not only due to the formidability of his mother's clan, but also because of his character. Xiao Fengshu enjoyed nurturing little wolves in the wild. He even liked training his sons with hard knocks until they went howling in pain, but Emuer was the exact opposite. Before Hassan had come of age, Emuer never allowed Hassan to leave his side. Every battle that Hassan fought during his earlier years was all taught by Emuer himself in person. "You are also a genius," Bayan responded as an afterthought. Hassan laughed out loud as he wiped his scimitar and shook his head. "Bayan, I'm not. I'm an ordinary man. I merely found my own path from battling against geniuses. To be honest, before heading north, I was worried about meeting Shao Jiming here, because Shao Jiming and Qi Juin belong to the same category of commanders. They're better at defense than offense. Do you understand? Not in the typical sense of defense, but one that leaves you with nowhere to make your moves and unable to find any vulnerability to attack. They are thorny to deal with. But Xiao Qie isn't the same. Hassan struggled to think of a description. In the end he laughed. I can't put my finger on it, but he obviously has plenty of shortcomings, and he isn't even trying to hide them. Then he's arrogant. Bayan herded the horse over to Hassan's side. He raised his hand and lightly tapped Hassan's shoulder. You are our new great hero, the eagle of the desert, and the future husband of Duo Erlin. It doesn't matter how humble you are, Hassan, in our eyes, you are a genius bestowed upon the Hanshi tribe by the gods. You are not inferior to anyone else. Thank you, Hassan said. My good friend, you should have come to my side earlier. The both of them traded looks and exchanged smiles. All of a sudden, they heard a few urgent whistles resounding through the night. Hassan raised his head to the sky, and a raindrop landed between his brows. It was no longer pouring like it had during the day. He patted the horse, looking westward of the Tudalong banner. It's time for us to haul in the net. Hassan's elite forces did not enter the battleground at all. The troops he had set before Xiao Qie were all regular troops that were originally stationed east of the Tudalong banner. Moreover, the troops he deployed to the eastern mountain range had a firm grip on Zhao Hui, preventing Zhao Hui from turning around and providing reinforcements. The path towards the battlefront was also obstructed. He had turned the Tudalong banner into a sack-like trap to ensnare Xiao Qie with. Xiao Qie had no way out. Hassan had long prepared for him an elite force that was all recharged and raring to go in the east. Even if Xiao Qie opted to escape, Hassan would also chase him down closely on horseback, so that Xiao Qie, with the exposed vulnerability on his back, would once again become the target of the hunt. The sound of horse hooves rang out once again, this time accompanied by torches that pressed in from the east. The exhausted imperial army could only retreat. Although the rain had stopped, the chill had intensified. Even Tantai, who had no choice but to huff warm air in his frozen hands. Xiao Qie walked in the mud, with the huffing and panting of the soldiers behind him. They had to retreat back to the marshland of the Tudalong banner as soon as possible. But Hassan did not miss this opportunity. His elite forces had eaten their fill during the day, and now they were lashing hard at their horses to spur them on, giving the imperial army no time to retreat at all. The imperial army that had been split into small groups hid themselves among the shrubbery and grassy fields, but Hassan's troops were meticulous in their scouting and left them with nowhere to conceal themselves. Gu Jin, who had good hearing, very quickly discerned that the horses' hooves were coming this way. Xiao Qie raised an arm to wipe his cheek and looked back at the pitch-black night. Flames abruptly lit up the horizon. Hassan's cavalry was like the falcon encroaching upon the sky not far away, its two wings spread out as it charged forth in what seemed like a glide. Master! Gu Jin led his own horse out. You should leave first. Mount your horse and head north. Xiao Qie remained where he was. Pass on military information along the way and tell them to withdraw back to the marshland. Tell Tantai who not to persist in fighting and to retreat immediately. The Biantia cavalry was getting closer. Xiao Qie could even hear the sounds of horses snorting hot air. Gu Jin remained in place and hesitated for a moment. Xiao Qie said with calm and composure, I have several hundred men here. It's not a problem to fight and retreat at the same time. I will make plans again once we retreat inside the marshland. Gu Jin knew that Xiao Qie would not change his command at his time, so he mounted his horse, whipped it into action, and charged into the night. Hassan had already seen the figures. The cavalry whistled, as though they were encircling the wild beasts in the desert. They did not rely on military flags to convey messages. The whistle rapidly relayed from the center army to both flanks. Following right after, the cavalry on both flanks turned their horses around to assemble in the center, turning the falcon with its wings spread into a straight arrow whose target was Xiao Qie. In war, speed was everything. Hassan knew the consequences of hesitation. When it came to Xiao Qie, he had to fight a quick battle. Otherwise, if Shao Chia were to retreat to the marshland and get the opportunity to catch his breath, it could very well lead to the next surprise attack on them. That's him. Bayan followed closely behind and pointed at Shao Chia as he hollered in Biantia language. Shao Chia. Hassan pulled off his scimitar and bent low at the same time. He did not need Bayan to remind him. He had already recognized Shao Chia. Shao Chia's height and appearance were far too conspicuous. His expression as he pursed his lips and looked back was simply identical to Shao Fengshu. Shao Chia wrung the dripping wet strip of cloth and swiftly wrapped it tightly around the space between his thumb and index finger. He watched as the cavalry pressed in towards them, his attention all but sucked away but Hassan's red hair. He counted the distance quietly. Just as Hassan's horse was about to trip on the rope, Hassan suddenly turned sideways and lowered his arm to slice the rope that had been hidden among the grass with one blow. The cavalry at the back dashed their way in without a hitch. The galloping cavalrymen brandished their scimitars, but Shao Chia did not move. In the blink of an eye, the hooves of the Biantia's horses sank into the camouflage horse pits, sending a number of men tumbling off their horses once more. The people in front fell to the ground, but Hassan, who was at the back, seemed to have anticipated it. That one step he had taken a beat slower earlier had been meant to test the ground. Shao Chia raised his finger, and the Imperial army jumped over the shrubs and broke into a dash. Hassan's horse was snorting hot air as Hassan blew the whistle again. These hastily dug pits for trapping horses were not deep enough, and they were able to simply leap over to give chase right behind Shao Chia. Hassan's target was clear, and that was Shao Chia. As long as he could kill Shao Chia, the scattered Imperial army would be just a bunch of men without a leader. The grain wagons within the marshland of the Tudalong banner would then naturally fall into their hands. Shao Chia stepped through the mud. A horse had already caught up next to him. The Biantia cavalryman on the horse barked at Shao Chia in Biantia language. Shao Chia leaped forward and crouched down on stable feet to dodge the scimitar coming towards him. Following right after, he sliced apart the Biantia cavalryman's saddle. Threatened by the blade, the startled horse was thrown into disorientation. Shao Chia caught hold of the cavalryman's arm that had been wielding the blade, but instead of hacking it off, he yanked hard on it to flip himself up the horse. Unable to withstand the force of gravity, the cavalryman tumbled off the horse, sending up a spray of mud. The horse of the Guma tribe, having had a change of masters, wretchedly flung its head from side to side and refused to run any more. Behind him, Hassan was pressing in close towards him. Shao Chia clamped down hard on the belly of the horse and yanked the reins, forcing the horse to crash its way through at an angle. Hassan had been too hurried in his pursuit of Shao Chia. Muddy water went splashing as both horses collided. Longly blade went slicing through the air towards Hassan's chest with such ferocity that Hassan did not dare to be negligent and parried the blow with all his strength. So heavy! Hassan's arms sank, and the scimitar almost slipped out of his hand under Shao Chia's force. He immediately understood just how extraordinary Shao Chia's arm strength was, so he avoided the glint as Shao Chia hacked down on him, no longer meeting Shao Chia head-on with force. The cavalrymen who were successively catching up behind them clung close to their horses' back. The horse beneath Shao Chia stirred restlessly as they reached out with their scimitars to sever his horse's front knees. The horse whinnied in pain, and its entire front body fell over into the mud hole. Shao Chia rolled off his horse. He was already surrounded. The Biantia cavalrymen formed a circle around Shao Chia, and the fleeing Imperial army swore and cursed out loud. Bloody hell, the viceroy fell off. The Imperial army who had yet to spring into the Tudalong banner promptly turned back, drew their blades, and lunged into the group of cavalrymen. They followed suit, doing what was done earlier. As long as they could not hang onto the Biantia cavalry and leap onto their horses, they would hack off the horses' legs and send the Biantia cavalry tumbling off their horses. They kept what Shao Chia had said firmly in mind. The Biantia cavalry was not skilled at standing on the ground and fighting at close quarters. but that was directed at the troops that had been crossing swords with the Libe armored cavalry in the north. Hassan had fought battles with Dajo's best infantry in the south. The one who had clashed with him was Lu Guangbai, and Xiao Qia's experience with cavalrymen, to sum it up, had all come from Lu Guangbai. Hassan's elite forces were not the least bit afraid of landing on the ground at all. On the contrary, they were rather composed and unhurried when they faced up against the imperial army after dismounting. They did not even need any buffer time at all. They could fight the instant they got up after rolling to the ground. Fuck. The imperial army, who had never suffered a defeat before, cursed in unison. These fuckers are even stronger than us. Chapter 153 Defeat. Chapter 153 Defeat. The imperial army was very much like Xiao Qia, but they were more sly than him. This was a group of soldiers that gave the Libe armored cavalry complicated feelings. After the reign of Yongyi, their reputation waned, and they were reduced to being mere ornamental decorations in Kudu. Even their original patrol duty had been snatched away by the 8 great training divisions. In the decades that followed, all they did were odd jobs, and they even appear to be more than happy to simply muddle and idle their way through life. But then, they met Xiao Qia, and it was as if they had been wiped clean of grime to finally shine in all their full glory in Kudu. The imperial army was unlike the Libe armored cavalry and the Qidong garrison troop. They were able to overlook all the noise and focus all of their attention solely on Xiao Qia. They could not hear a single one of the criticisms against Xiao Qia. As long as Xiao Qia waved his hand and signaled them, they would be willing to go through the most severe of trials and tribulations alongside him. This was a brew of loyalty blended with the code of brotherhood. A prime example, right this moment. The enemy clearly outnumbered them, yet the imperial army felt no fear. They chopped off the horses' legs belonging to the Biancha cavalry's vanguard so that a break opened up in Hansen's encirclement. However, the number of follow-up cavalry multiplied exponentially, and these men were all highly adaptable to boot. Without even needing Hassan to give his command, they had already figured out the imperial army's intentions. The imperial army still wanted to hack off more legs, but the Biancha cavalry dismounted from their horses before charging into the battlefield. They had no armors, and the furs they donned were light and cold-resistant, so it was with extreme agility that they moved. Unlike Huhilu's squad, each of them had a spare scimitar at the side of their horses, and pike daggers tightly secured on the outside of their thighs. In the event that their scimitars were damaged, they could still use the reserve scimitars, or swap over to the pike daggers to fight at close quarters. They were taciturn, well-trained men. Xiao Qia was gasping for breath as he savagely swept his eyes over this elite force. Hassan did not say a word. He did not need to engage in any form of communication with Xiao Qia. He did not want to use Xiao Qia to threaten Xiao Fengshu either, and he knew very well that leaving Xiao Qia alive would mean no end to troubles in the future. Now was the moment to kill off Xiao Qia. Hassan locked eyes with Xiao Qia. He gripped his scimitar with one hand and released the reins with the other hand, letting it fall gently into the mudhole. They were like certain beasts facing off against each other in confrontation, their abhorrence for the other mixed in with the stench of blood. Hassan kept moving, wading through the muddy water while observing Xiao Qia. Sporadic raindrops left in the night sky dripped onto the back of Xiao Qia's hand as he gripped Longli blade and followed Hassan with his eyes. This was a strange kind of silence. Tumultuous sound of killing clearly abounded all around them, and yet Xiao Qia found it quiet, so quiet that his hair was standing on end. He had to restrain himself before he could suppress that murderous intent to kill bubbling up in his body. Hassan was no longer moving. He seemed to have noticed Xiao Qia's testiness. They both vied for the right to call the shots on this battlefield, and attempted to influence its atmosphere. This made it clear that there was no way they could coexist. What they wanted was absolute control over their own rhythm. A water drop slid along the back of Xiao Qia's slightly bulging hand. At the very instant it dripped off, Hassan burst into action. His red hair was like a flaming torch in the dark night, charging right before Xiao Qia's eyes the very instant the mud splashed aside. In the blink of an eye, Hassan's scimitar pressed in towards Xiao Qia's throat. Xiao Qia took a sudden step back, and the mud splashed out in a fan-like arc along with the movements of his legs and feet. He swung up Longly Blade in a half-circle, and both of them collided in mid-air. The impact forced Hassan's feet to slide back some, but he regained his footing and bounced back into action the next moment, even cleverly learning to dodge. Longly Blade was a heavyweight executioner's blade, and Xiao Qia's arm strength was what it relied on. Every move Hassan made during the fight was executed with the intention to hack off Xiao Qia's arm. Each time Xiao Qia wielded his blade, he would strike at empty air. Even if he caught up with Hassan, Hassan would immediately turn his scimitar sideways and brush past it so that he would not have to shoulder Xiao Qia's terrifying strength. Assaulters were also sneaking up behind Xiao Qia out of nowhere. He used and pushed his sight and hearing to full capacity, but his physical strength was like water already splashed. In less than an hour, Xiao Qia felt his own movements slowing down a little. Hassan lunged once again, and at the same time, a strong gust of wind suddenly came assaulting him from behind. Xiao Qia abruptly strode half a step to sidestep and dodged the scimitar behind his back, then backhandedly grasped the arm of the man behind him. Following right after, he spun around to kick Hassan over and break the arm of the man who sneaked up on him from behind. The scimitar on the other side cleaved down on Xiao Qia's arm. A loud thud rang out as the blow was blocked by the arm guard Sun Zichuan had gifted him. A slurry of mud erupted like exploding artillery shells as the Biancha cavalry simultaneously bore their scimitars down on Longly Blade. Xiao Qia promptly lifted a fist with his left hand and punched one of them over. The pressure on Longly Blade promptly subsided some, and he lowered his body and made to lift the blade. With his scimitar cracked from the impact from Longly's blade, Hassan abandoned it, pulled out the pike daggers from both sides of his legs, and sprang when he saw his chance. All of a sudden, one of the Imperial army pounced and grabbed Hassan around his waist. He even used a wrestling technique, but failed to trip Hassan. Hassan flipped over the pike dagger, slid it along that man's armor, and viciously stabbed it into the side of his neck. Blood spurt like a fountain of spring water. Hassan had yet to pull out the pike dagger, instead turning his head aside first to dodge Xiao Qia's blade. Men were dying on both sides. The Imperial army did not expect Hassan's elite force to be this formidable, and likewise, this elite force did not expect the Imperial army to be able to hang in there for so long. The Biancha cavalry at the periphery took out iron chains attached with small copper balls. These kinds of chains were similar in appearance to the chains used by the Libe armored cavalry, but much lighter. They pressed in, shrinking the encirclement area, and when Xiao Qia's Longly Blade was pinned down once again, they flung countless chains towards Xiao Qia. The copper balls caught on to Xiao Qia's arms and legs. With Xiao Qia now entangled in the iron chains, they dragged him over to the ground in one abrupt move. Hassan's pike dagger shot right towards Xiao Qia's face. Xiao Qia practically used up all of his strength to drag his arms over to block the blow, causing the Biancha cavalry of the other end, who was pulling at the chains, to stumble in unison. Once again, the pike dagger slammed into the arm guard with a thud, but this piece of top-quality iron could not withstand this kind of repeated blows raining upon it one after another. Xiao Qia felt the dogskin string snap. The arm guard was already dented. Xiao Qia attempted to break free of the chains, but there were simply too many for his arms to bear. He tilted his head to spit out the muddy sand in his mouth, watching as the scimitars of the cavalry went straight for his own throat. At this moment, Xiao Qia saw the billowy black sky. The winds of Hongyan mountains blew against his drenched hair, and he thought of Sun Zichuan in between ragged gasps. Hassan's victory was initially already within grasp, but who would have expected Xiao Qia to shoulder the combined force of all the tugging and pulling from those holding him down and raise both legs to kick over a blade-wielding cavalryman? The iron chains securing him suddenly went swinging. It was impossible to tell if it was sweat or muddy water trickling along his temples, but blue veins visibly protruded as Xiao Qie executed a kip, up to and flipped himself up to his feet. However, one person alone could not salvage the situation, much like one log could not prop up a collapsing building. During the time Xiao Qie executed his move, the cavalry had yanked the chains taut. He had gotten on his feet for only a mere moment before he was once again dragged back to the ground. Even if he was blessed with wings, escape was impossible tonight. In the nick of time, the ground suddenly started to quake. Water droplets among the shrubbery and branches leaped about as the battle call of a war horn reverberated through the boundless night. Hassan looked out towards the south. As expected, he saw a person single-handedly charging over in a mad dash, and following close in his wake was a black tide that similarly steamrolled everything in its path under the crushing darkness of the night. The closer they got, the more aggressively the mudhole shook from that muffled thunder-like roar of horses' hooves, a testament to the heavy weight of steel armors. Hassan immediately whistled. The cavalry flipped onto their horses in an orderly fashion and swiftly withdrew northward. Before he turned the horse around, Hassan regretfully glanced towards Xiao Qie. He raised 2 fingers, tapped his temple, and leaned towards Xiao Qie to bid him a polite farewell. Then he took his leave and sped away, leaving a scene of devastation behind in his wake. The black-armored cavalry charged over to Xiao Qie's side, circling around him once. Xiao Fengshu removed his helmet and looked askance at Xiao Qie. In a grave voice, he commanded those behind him, "Untie your second young master." What an unsightly sight! The expression in Xiao Qie's eyes was scathingly cold and grave. It was the shame of having his first taste of defeat. There were commanding generals of the 5 camps in the Shaosan camp, all of whom reported to Xiao Fengshu. Based on ranking, Xiao Qie's position was at the very bottom. However, he had been thoroughly defeated this time, and he cut such a sorry figure as he squatted outside of the tent and rinsed half his body with cold water that the commanding generals who came and went would all cast him a glance. Xiao Qie did not seem to feel the blade-inflicted wounds on his shoulders, chest, and back as the cold water scoured his body pale. Zhuqianqiu lifted up the flap after the meeting in the tent had been dismissed, and as he looked at the sight of Xiao Qie squatting at the side with his back to him, his reproach had all but turned into a twinge of bemusement. He called out, "Come in and drink a bowl of warm milk. Don't you fall sick on such a cold day." Xiao Qie mumbled an answer and rose to put away the water bucket before walking into the tent. There was a fire going in the tent. Xiao Qie's armor had been so badly damaged that it could no longer be used. Xiao Fengshu was currently examining the dented top-quality iron of the arm guard. Zhuqianqiu instructed the military medic to dress Xiao Qie's wounds, so Xiao Qie sat bare-chested on the little stool and remained still. After some time, Chen Yang, Gu Jin, Tantai Hu, and Wu Ziyu entered. "Give your commanding general a report of the casualty count." Xiao Fengshu tossed the arm guard back onto the table, sat down, and said to Chen Yang. Chen Yang quietly answered, "The Imperial Army lost 300 men." Louder, Xiao Fengshu looked at Chen Yang. "Why are you hanging your head looking all so dejected?" Chen Yang raised his voice. "The Imperial Army lost 300 men. 36 men sustained severe injuries, and 8 got away with light injuries. The Imperial Army was Xiao Qie's route. He had to be responsible for all its casualties, fatal or otherwise. This army no longer held any possibility of further expansion, for it was unique and distinctive. The moment the entire force was decimated, even Xiao Qie himself would not be able to rebuild it in Libei. This meant that as long as the Imperial Army suffered a defeat in a battle, it would face exponential losses. While 300 people were nothing to the Qidong garrison troops or the Libei armored cavalry, it was considered heavy casualty to the Imperial Army. Silence descended upon the tent. Tantai, who snuck a couple of glances at Chen Yang and Gu Jin before finally plucking up his courage and speaking up, Hassan caught us off guard, Master was also. Now report the casualties of the 3 great training divisions of Luoyang to your commanding general. Xiao Fengshu ordered. Chunyang paused for a moment. The Luoyang Southern Route Army lost 892 men, 45 sustained heavy injuries, and 237 suffered light injuries. Zhao Hui was initially fighting on the northern route. This southern route army was established at the last minute to rescue your imperial army. A total of 2,000 men, while digging the collapsed bridle path, encountered a surprise attack by the cavalry that Hassan left stationed at the northern route. Practically half the men died. Xiao Fengshu continued, if you had just stayed where you were, you would have met with them in just under 4 hours, but you impulsively turned around and headed for the Tudalong banner. How are you going to account for this loss to Zhao Hui? Xiao Qia said nothing. Xiao Fengshu continued, you should remember that you're the commanding general in charge of the escort and transportation of military supplies, not the commanding general for combat. To think you'd forcibly assault Hassan's squad with a few hundred men. Did a donkey kick you in the head, Xiao Qia? Zhuqianxiu originally should not have spoken, but Xiao Qia had just retreated from the battlefield, and as his Shifu, it was inevitable for his heart to ache for him. Thus he said, Hassan has been planning for it for a long time this time, and it just so happened that they'd chance upon a rainstorm. The situation was urgent then. Yi, you never treated the Libei armored cavalry as your own duty at all. In your eyes, there's only the imperial army. With his hand on his knees, Xiao Fengshu suddenly turned stern. The battle at Bianbua camp went to your head, letting you get carried away by your success. You regarded everyone as Huhilu. Your defeat today to Hassan is a lesson. What exactly do you have that'd possess you to fight with him head-on? Lift your head up. Wu Ziyu could no longer bear it and fell to his knees on the ground with a thud. Once he kneeled, Tantai who cluelessly followed suit and kneeled. Then, thud, thud, Chunyang and Gu Jin kneeled too. Xiao Fengshu swiftly looked towards them. Wu Ziyu said in an extremely feeble voice, Your lordship. It's not what you think. My legs have gone all wobbly. Chapter 154, Man. Chapter 154. Man. After getting a scolding, Xiao Qia still had to receive his punishment publicly in the military tent. He had been demoted, and now he could not even be considered a commanding general. So what if he was a talented genius? He still had to eat the humble pie after suffering a defeat. Never brag on the war zone about the battles once fought and the enemies once vanquished. All of these counted for nothing. Xiao Qia killed Huhilu at the Shasan camp, and this indeed was the subject of intense discussion in the army, but Xiao Fengshu did not reward him and instead made him a general in charge of military supplies. Others might not understand this move, but the old-school generals knew best that this meant Xiao Fengshu had the intent to entrust Xiao Qia with heavy responsibilities. Xiao Fengshu did not reward him because he wanted to shut up the mouths of those criticizing Xiao Qia. He wanted to prove that he was far harsher and more exacting on his son than he was to others. Guowei rarely scored any wins in all his battles against Huhilu at the Tudalong banner, but Xiao Fengshu promoted him and deployed him to the Shasan camp to continue in his capacity as the commanding general. With such a stark contrast, the smart ones would all know to shut up, as this meant that Xiao Qia's promotions in the future were all based on genuine and solid military achievements, and it would also leave Xiao Qia room for defeat. It was not that they could not afford to lose a battle on the battlefield. Xiao Jiming could, and so could Guowei and Zhao Hui, because they were all generals Li Bei was familiar with. Their defeats were pardonable and forgivable under the circumstances, and these were all what Xiao Qia lacked. Once Xiao Qia really came to stand in the forefront of the front line, he could only win. He had to prove to the dispirited Li Bei armored cavalry that he was the best choice of candidate for Li Bei. Xiao Qia walked out of the military tent and put on his clothes. His waist and lower back were wrapped with gauze, and his right arm had sustained the worst injuries. For now, He would not be able to use the conqueror bow, and he even had to exercise caution while wielding Longly blade. Xiao Qia huffed out a few breaths of hot air and whistled for Lang Tao Shuijin. Lang Tao Shuijin had just been washed and had yet to be saddled. Xiao Qia flipped atop it, patted it on the neck, and leaned over to whisper a few words to it. Lang Tao Shuijin then turned on its hooves and obediently galloped away into the night. He's still the same. Zhuqianxiu stood by the entrance of the tent and lamented, every time he's feeling down, he likes to go riding. He's holding in his anger. Xiao Fengshu lifted up the boiling tea. It can be seen that his 6 years in Kudu weren't for naught. If tonight's events had happened in the past, he would have even dared to fling aside the tent flap and run off when I scolded him for the second time. No one can beat those old foxes of Kudu when it comes to tempering a person. The blame for this battle really can't be entirely pinned on him. Zhuqianxiu looked back. Hassan set up such a trap in the Tudalong banner. Even if it had been either of us, we might not necessarily be able to escape unscathed either. The possibility of if is nil in war. It's his battle, and the outcome, win or loss, ought to be his to bear. Xiao Fengshu paused for a moment. There's no doubt this battle is lost. That he dared to turn back to the marshlands of the Tudalong banner to outflank and fight makes me really happy deep down. Right. Zhuqianxiu laughed as he pointed at Xiao Fengshu. It's just like you to say one thing but mean another. Xiao Fengshu held the teacup. But I can't praise him. Zhuqianxiu replied, you never held back your praise for Jiming. Those brothers are different. Xiao Fengshu turned his face sideways to face him. Jiming takes after his mother. After having a little brother, he often hears others speak of how Yi resembles his father, as if he's snatching Yi's place by being born a couple of years earlier. As such, I must praise Jiming often. Yi takes after me. What's more, he's the baby of the family. He has Jiming as an older brother shielding him, and that makes him a wild one who dares to play with whatever his heart desires. He almost broke his neck when he fell while taming his horse when he wasn't even 14, and the moment the injury healed, he insisted on carrying on with taming the horse even if he had to sneak out to do it. That battle he fought when he was 14 was so beautifully executed that there wasn't a person who didn't praise him when he returned to dying. At that time, he didn't allow anyone to give him what he wanted. He had to obtain it on his own, even if he had to go without food and drink. A personality like his doesn't lack praises, but scoldings. Being a father is a skill. I can't be compared to you. Zhuqianxiu's wife had died prematurely. After the Battle of Tianfei Watchtower, he had wandered all over Dazhou and did not remarry, so he naturally had no children. He sat down and said, but there has been no lack of talents from Bianxia in recent years. Amur has a great son too. Hassan is neither arrogant nor rash, and he is decisive and straightforward in all the moves he makes. Amur has a good eye. Xiao Fengshu took a sip of the hot tea. The rarest thing about Hassan is that he doesn't stick to one combat style, yet his character is rather steady. If Jiming were to be deployed back here, Zhuqianxiu said, he could more or less restrain him. That's right. Xiao Fengshu shifted his feet slightly. Zhao Hui's combat style bears the closest resemblance to Jiming's after having learned from the latter while serving under him. But when Hassan previously fought against Qidong, the one he faced up against was Qi Juin, who is of the same kind as Jiming. He's already accustomed to that kind of rhythm. Look at Zhao Hui. Although he was able to contain Hassan's onslaughts of attacks, he was also, at the same time, firmly nailed down in place by Hassan in the northern route. Zhuqianxiu started to laugh. But when Hassan faced Yi, it was one formidable adversary against another. Even if their military strength were equally matched, I still think that the probability of both sides suffering losses is much higher. You're thinking too highly of him by saying both sides will suffer losses. He is currently no match for Hassan at all. Hassan has been on the battleground for even longer than Jiming, and experience is something that's far more fearsome than talent. The discrepancy between him and Yi is not insignificant. Xiao Fengshu stood up, flipping and turning a dagger between his fingers as he stared at the straw target across him. The wolf pup can't win. Zhuqianqiu clasped his hands behind his back and said leisurely, "The general in charge of military supplies is a good post. Once he has a thorough grasp of its workings, he will know all of Li Bei's major and minor military routes, the strengths and weaknesses of the various camps, and even the personalities of the commanding generals like the back of his hand." Xiao Fengshu threw the dagger hard and hit the bullseye. He turned his head and smiled smugly at Zhuqianqiu. "I'm going to give Amur a gift and let him witness my prowess." It was almost dawn when Xiao Qie returned. He dismounted, and Chen Yang came forward to hand him a handkerchief. He wiped the sweat on his neck and saw Xiao Fengshu standing a short distance away, motioning for him to go over. He was not at all willing and thought of pretending not to have seen him. So Xiao Fengshu hung one arm over the back of Xiao Qie's neck, forcing Xiao Qie to bend down, then used his other hand to vigorously touzle the top of Xiao Qie's hair until it was all a mess. "Where's my falcon?" With some difficulty, Xiao Qie finally broke away and rubbed his neck. "Don't feed it raw meat. It's your falcon, so why are you asking me?" Xiao Fengshu took a few steps forward. Seeing him still unhappy, he turned around and made to kick him. Xiao Qie hurriedly leaped away and said, "I'm just asking." Xiao Fengshu ignored him and petted Lang Tao Shuijin. "We had a new batch of horses from last year back at home. There's one that has just the opposite color as this one, white tinted with black. A real beauty." "Oh." Xiao Qie could tell his intent. "You want to give it to me?" Xiao Fengshu looked askance at him. "You? Your elder sister-in-law is keeping it for your wife." Xiao Qie cast a glance at Hongyan Mountains behind him and said nothing. "That arm guard is pretty good." Xiao Fengshu stepped on the wooden railing and hoisted himself up to sit on it. Seeing Xiao Qie looking back, he followed suit and turned sideways to shoot a glance at Xiao Qie's expression. "Where did you craft it? It's not Qidong's style." "Of course it's good." Xiao Qie turned his head back and said secretively, as if he had something to hide, "That's my protective amulet." Xiao Fengshu uttered a perfunctory acknowledgement, then followed up right after with a question, "Where is she from? You couldn't have taken her to Bianbo camp, could you? It's all stinky men there. How old is she?" Xiao Qie said, "Stinky man?" Xiao Fengshu did not get it. Xiao Qie took several steps back. Xiao Fengshu narrowed his eyes. "Don't tell me you brought back a girl from the Hua clan?" Xiao Qie continued to retreat. On seeing his father's lost and puzzled expression, he inexplicably laughed out loud, and while he was at it, he removed Longli blade and tossed it to the side. "Xiao Qie." Xiao Fengshu sensed something amiss. "You'd better tell me honestly," Xiao Qie suddenly said in a loud voice. "Stinky man." "Huh!" Xiao Fengshu suspected he had misheard it and even cocked his ear to one side. "I found myself a man." Sunlight shone on Xiao Qie's face, dispelling the dark clouds of yesterday. This brat was truly a little rascal as he shouted provocatively, "The best-looking man in the whole of Dazhou is my wife." Having said that, he did not even wait for Xiao Fengshu's reaction before he turned around and took to his heels. Xiao Fengshu fell silent for a very long time. Chen Yang softly swallowed his saliva and saw Xiao Fengshu jump up abruptly. As Xiao Fengshu landed on the ground, he almost tripped over himself. Chen Yang hurriedly called out, "Your lord, Xiao Qie." Xiao Fengshu let out an earth-shaking roar. He pushed himself off the ground with his hands to chase after him, but he could not catch up. In a fit of anger, he picked up a piece of horse dung and flung it at Xiao Qie, cussing, "Get your ass back here and make yourself clear." Chapter 155. Negotiations. Chapter 155. Negotiations. Xiao Qie received not only a scolding, but also a beating. but he had been thinking about this matter for a long time, and did not want to hide it from his family. He stood inside the military tent to accept his punishment of demotion. Before the commanding generals withdrew from the tent, they sneaked a glance at Xiao Fangxiu, only to find his lordship even angrier. Zhuqianqiu looked at the armed guard over and over again, then gave Xiao Fangxiu a slight thumbs up. I really can't tell from this. Xiao Fangxiu stood at the other end with his back to them and said, Would I not know what armed guard he uses? At most, it's processed dogskin. He would simply presume on his thick skin and not put in any effort into this at all. Zhuqianqiu was put in a spot too, as he looked at Xiaoqie and said hesitantly, Why didn't you mention it to us when you were in Kudu? Tell Shifu about him now, so that we can mentally prepare ourselves a little. Prepare, my ass. Xiao Fangxiu looked back. He already had it all figured out and was just waiting for me to take the bait. You'll have to meet him sooner or later. Xiaoqie took the scolding with his hands behind his back. What ought to be done has to be done. I still want to take him home this year to see Mother. You sure have it all arranged, huh? Xiao Fangxiu's words were loaded with sarcasm. I might as well call you father. One Xiaoqie did not dare to continue this thread of conversation. Where's he from? Zhuqianqiu set down the arm guard. Kudu. Xiaoqie answered honestly, Zhongbua. So Zhuqianqiu said to Xiao Fangxiu. That's still not too bad, it's close by. He followed up with a question, How old? Xiaoqie answered, 21. Pretty young. Zhuqianqiu inexplicably found this prerequisite to be familiar, but he could not quite put his finger on it for the moment and merely continued, The arm guard is quite well done. Is he in this trade? Xiaoqie replied. No. Xiao Fangxiu sneered. Do you dare to repeat what you said outside earlier to your Shifu? Xiaoqie gave a slight cough. Xiao Fangxiu said, I demoted you, and you stabbed me in the heart. Xiaoqie found these words of his familiar. Not falling for it, he said, I didn't. I wouldn't dare to. Zhuqianqiu was still wondering about what kind of person this man was, so he asked, Then, what's his name? Is he from a clan we are familiar with? Yes. Xiaoqie paused for a moment, then answered, Xin Zichuan. Several days later, Kong Ling and Yu Xiaozai arrived at Luoxia Pass. Xizhou wanted to discuss long-term cooperation with Luoxia Pass, and both parties had more or less reached an agreement through their written correspondences. This time, they wanted direct passage through it so that they could arrive at Huaizhou before the end of the 8th month. The 8th month had only just started when the original commander of Fanzhou's garrison troops revolted with the intent to proclaim himself king. He even deployed troops to seize Dengzhou first, wanting to use this opportunity to threaten Xizhou. In addition, he also sent a document to demand Xizhou transfer the grains they sold to Chazhou to them, calling it a loan of grain. Shen Zichuan, of course, ignored him and got Zhou Gui to draft up an official denunciation cum declaration of war and dispatched it to Chazhou with the intent to join forces and eradicate the bandits. With the exception of his own self, he slapped the label of bandits on all the armed groups in Zhongbua. This King Yi of Fanzhou naturally did not accept this, and both parties hurled verbal abuse at each other from afar. The advisors under their command traded letters to send greetings to the other party's ancestors. At the same time, they also spared no effort to make the other party out as rebels, while describing themselves as being compelled to revolt for the sake of the people. Shen Zichuan did not remain idle either. Time was precious at present. In between the exchange of abuses on both sides, he had the Xizhou's prefectural yamen start repairing the bridle paths and relay stations leading to the various prefectures. This was no small project and could only be completed at the end of the year. Meanwhile, Xizhou's garrison troops continued to push ahead with their training. Xizhou was now expanding at full steam. Apart from what is needed for Huaizhou, the profits from the sales of grain this time are enough for the repairs of the bridle paths. But the grains distributed by the yamen will no doubt be reduced as well. I don't have the heart to turn away the increasing number of refugees as winter comes around. Zhou Gui presented a book to Shinzichuan. And with the weather getting colder, we are seeing a gradual uptick in refugees from Danqing. Speaking of the refugees from Danqing, holding the book in hand, Shinzichuan turned to look at Yao Wenyu. Yuanjua comes from Danqing and knows more about the current situation there better than we do. Why is the number of refugees increasing so much all of a sudden? On hearing him, Yao Wenyu, who had a coat draped over him, answered with a serious countenance. After the previous emperor's death, Han Cheng wanted to convince the Empress Dowager to create more official positions for the descendants of the noble clans and use the state treasury to support these descendants on behalf of the noble clans. The list comprised over 10,000 people, but the Empress Dowager didn't consent. To preserve their strength, the noble clans with Han Cheng at the head became even more aggressive in seizing the commoners' crop fields. They fraudulently underreported the acreage too of fields to the higher-ups, thereby hiding away vast expanses of fertile farmland and leaving the common people without land to grow crops. These commoners even had to pay poll tax per head in their families. As a result, the number of people who fled increased. According to the law, once their household registration is confirmed, those who leave illegally without relevant documentation from the local authorities will be drafted into the army, or worse, immediately executed. Shinzichuan thought through it for a moment. The most suitable way to escape arrest from the local authorities is to come to Zhongbua. But Xizhou's capacity is limited after all, and relying solely on the yamen to distribute grain is not a viable solution in the long run. We cannot afford to feed this many people. And it wasn't just that. A portion of the refugees who had come to Xizhou had gotten hooked on getting free meals. They made excuses to decline registering themselves in the census registry, instead assuming the status of refugee, so that they could freeload and idle their lives away at the entrance of the yamen. I made a special point of asking the census officials. Many of the people in this group are the young and strong who loiter around the streets and stir up trouble. Public order was good before the 7th month, but after the 8th month, theft became a common occurrence. When the yamen constables arrest and send them to prison, they become unreasonable and make a scene. Speaking to this point, Zhou Gui fretted with worries. After they found out that they could still fill their tummies in jail, they became even more brazen. Alas! Shinzichuan had already come to a decision on this matter. He said, "They dared to be this dauntless only because Xizhou is accommodating and magnanimous towards the refugees and has not set the relevant penalties in place. It is still treating them as local citizens of decent origins to deal with. But the times are different now. Today, I'd like to ask you gentlemen to draft a document to strictly forbid refugees from putting off registering themselves in the census registry. By the middle of the 8th month at the very latest, anyone who has not registered themselves at the yamen will be all driven out without exception. Not only that, Xizhou shall put up notices everywhere the day after and assign the relevant clerks down to explain. Make sure to clarify what is at stake if they break the law clearly to the illiterate commoners in the city. Starting from the day after tomorrow, any violators and offenders shall be dealt with severely. No mercy will be shown." Shinzichuan's methods had always been pretty mild ever since he had arrived in Xizhou, and he always looked to be an amicable and easygoing person to outsiders. He never flaunted his talents openly, even when it came to Chazhou's matters, but this time, with a change from his former style, he could be said to be swift and decisive. Zhou Gui said hesitantly, "But will we lose the hearts and support of the people if we put up severe punishments in place? After all, it was only a few months ago that Xizhou started taking in the refugees with open arms. These are two separate matters." Yao Wenyu timed his words perfectly. Xizhou accommodates the refugees out of compassion, but if it were to lose its trust with the people because of this, then it'd be putting the cart before the horse. As the saying goes, to deal with external foes, we have to first resolve internal conflict. Cizhou must first eradicate its internal threats as soon as possible, otherwise it will prove to be a burden in the future. Fanzhou already has a King Yi now. Shun Zichuan set down the book. This King Yi wants to establish a small Zhongbua imperial court at the southeastern side of Cizhou, and he has assembled the military forces from the two prefectures of Fanzhou and Dengzhou and poised them for combat against Cizhou in an attempt to get us to be his granary. The situation will be even more chaotic after spring next year. We cannot yield and make any more concessions because of the words benevolence and righteousness. Besides, this is also a good thing. Yao Wenyu said to Zhou Gui. Repairing the bridle paths and relay stations need manpower, and the refugees just so happen to fill in the vacancies in Cizhou. With the Yamen distributing grains to them based on the quantity of work, they have somewhere to use their strengths, and they also get to fill their tummies, so naturally, they won't go around stirring up trouble. Zhou Gui nodded as well on hearing this. Once the household registration is settled, the Yamen will have an exact number of people in Cizhou. If we start with the surveillance of fields at the end of the 8th month, we will be able to finish the divisions of fields before the start of spring next year. As long as we don't encounter a natural disaster next year, Cizhou's granary will be able to maintain its abundance. This is the first year. Shun Zichuan was in a pretty good mood. Chazhou will also be put on the agenda next year. Other than that, we should also prepare to open up a new bridle path on the Luoxia Pass and Huaizhou's route to the northwest. Taken aback, Zhou Gui asked, "Are we not borrowing the bridle path from Libei?" "That's right, but in the long run, we still have to remunerate Luoxia Pass accordingly." Shun Zichuan said, "Luoxia Pass is right above Quanqing. They are allies we need to befriend. Once it begins thriving along the trade route, the present routes will be insufficient for us. Not to mention that Beiyuan hunting grounds is going to become the Imperial Army's camp. It's essential to open up new bridle paths. Then there's also the issue of army provisions for the various areas in early spring next year." The weather was bad, and Yao Wenyu's legs were hurting, but he looked no different from how he usually was. Firstly, Qidong is the biggest threat to the south of Zhongbua. They had not managed to deploy troops to Zhongbua in time as they were affected by the late emperor's assassination and Lu Guangbai's desertion. But now that the marriage alliance between the Hua and Qi is already a done deal, chances are high that they might send troops up north to crush us if army provisions in early spring next year are sufficient. Secondly, now that Libei has broken free of Kudu's control, the northeast provisions bridle path has been stripped of the rights to directly access the Jueshi's granaries. Libei shares a common lot with us, and Libei is the one to shoulder the responsibility of fighting back the Biancha cavalry in the north, so the issue of army provisions has to be resolved before spring falls. The advisors were all discussing affairs in a partitioned-off area in the study, separated by a screen in the middle. As they were indoors all year round, many of them smoked pipes, and as time passed, smoke began to permeate the study, making it stuffy. Shun Zichuan called out to Qiao Tianya, "Help Yuanjua out to take a breath of fresh air." Yao Wenyu bent over slightly in a bow to Shun Zichuan from the wheelchair he was seated in and let Qiao Tianya push him out. Shun Zichuan instructed Zhou Gui to open the windows and have the advisors in the partitioned area take a break too. The air in the room was too heavy and smoky, so Shun Zichuan headed out as well to take a breather in the chilly wind. It was the rainy season in Cizhou of late. Sunny days were few and far between, and the weather was extremely cold. Worried that Shun Zichuan would fall ill again, Ji Gang was particularly cautious and watched him every day as he put on extra clothes and had Fei Xing follow him around whenever he headed out. The moment Fei Xing saw Shun Zichuan step out, he walked over to hand him the cloak. Shun Zichuan draped it over himself and walked along the covered walkway for a moment. The flowers of the Chinese scholar trees in this courtyard had long withered, and the leaves on the branches had all fallen off, leaving bare trees set against the backdrop of gloomy skies. It was quite the picture of bleakness and desolation. Thinking of a way to amuse him, Fei Xing said, "Master, there's also a copper crock in this show's residence that's exactly a carbon copy of the one in our residence. There are a few brocade carps in it that got swatted around by that gluttonous cat of Mr. Shen Zichuan looked over and said, "The one in our residence is a housewarming gift from Madame Zhou." Shen Zichuan was a little chilly standing there, but he felt a lot more clear-headed. Noting that it was about time, he headed back under the eaves of the study. Qiao Tianya and Yao Wenyu had not yet returned, so he waited for a while longer. At that moment, Zhou Gui came over in a rush, gesturing for Shen Zichuan to head in. By then, it was almost the hour of Yu, and after 3 more quarters 3 of discussion, it was time for dismissal. The advisors still had to work through the night to draft the new documents, and Shen Zichuan had to head to the study to review the details and discuss the finer aspects with everyone when he woke up the next morning at the hour of Mao. It was a race against time to get the notice up before midday the day after tomorrow. Once winter comes around, the mutual market of Libei will also start bustling with activities. Shen Zichuan stood by the door as he conversed with Zhou Gui. "Negotiate with the Yen clan if you can. If not, forget it. When the time comes, we can take a detour to Jueshi from Huaizhou. Although it's a long distance, we can think of a way to traverse the waterways owned by the Hua family of Diqing. The army provisions also." Ding Tao entered from the courtyard entrance and leaped over the railings in a couple of steps. Shen Zichuan broke off their conversation and signaled for Ding Tao to speak first. Ding Tao's cheeks were slightly flushed as he excitedly exclaimed, "Young master, the hereditary prince's consort is here." Chapter 156. Eldest Sister-in-Law. Chapter 156. Eldest sister-in-law. The hereditary prince's consort, Lu Yizhi and Xiao Jiming, were childhood sweethearts who went on to live in conjugal harmony after their marriage. She was a renowned figure in Libei for her virtues. When the prince's consort of Libei passed away from illness, Xiao Qia was still an ignorant brat. As the saying goes, a virtuous elder sister-in-law is comparable to a mother, and that was precisely what Lu Yizhi was in Xiao Qia's eyes. She was not only Lu Guangbai's younger sister, but also Qi Zhuin's bosom friend. The horse carriage stopped outside the city of Cizhou, accompanied by the Libei armored cavalry on both sides of the public road. Lu Yizhi sat within and listened to the incoming sound of footsteps beyond the curtain. Someone called out, "Vice Commander! Vice Commander!" Lu Yizhi gently clasped her hands and thought in delight, "That's him." Zhou Gui stood outside the horse carriage and paid his obeisances from afar. "Greetings to your ladyship. It has been a long, tiring journey for your ladyship, so please head into the city quickly." Lu Yizhi had never seen Zhou Gui, and naturally, she had never heard Zhou Gui's voice either. Since it was "Vice Commander" she heard earlier, she took Zhou Gui to be Shen Zichuan. The horse carriage drove towards the city gate, and as the wheels rolled over the gravel, she quietly lifted a corner of the window curtain and saw Zhou Gui's back. Zhou Gui was standing with his back to her, so Lu Yizhi could not see him in the face and thought that this Shen Zichuan was rather different from the way Xiao Qia described him in the letter. She soundlessly put down the curtain, but lifted it again after a moment for another look. This time, Zhou Gui's face was revealed. He was much older than Xiao Jiming, of average stature, and had a thin and lean face with a handsome beard to match. Lu Yizhi was so startled that she was struck dumb. Fortunately, she still had her wits about her and could still remember that Shen Zichuan was a good 2 years younger than Xiao Qia. Right at this time, she saw Zhou Gui bow over slightly to make way for a white figure. This white figure was tall and slender. Although he was standing sideways, she could vaguely catch a glimpse of his appearance. Lu Yizhi sized him up carefully, thinking that Yi truly wasn't bragging. He was indeed a looker. Presumably, he took after his mother more. How would Shen Zichuan know that Lu Yizhi was sizing him up? He spoke to Zhou Gui in a hushed tone. I'd like to ask the various advisors to draft up the new document today. Other matters can be temporarily postponed for discussion another day. Even if Zhou Gui was an obtuse one, he also knew who Lu Yizhi was here to see. He followed Shun Zichuan closely and said, "I'll immediately assign some men from the Yamen over." Shun Zichuan was momentarily taken aback. "Whatever for?" Zhou Gui's palms were sweating as he answered, "To protect you." Shun Zichuan was speechless. He looked at the accompanying retinue of about 500 men from the Libei armored cavalry. If they were really here to capture him, Zhou Gui would not have been able to stop them, even if he wanted to. Shao Chia had not sent any letters after the 8th month, so he could only act based on his conjectures. He promptly reassured Zhou Gui in a casual tone, "Perhaps the hereditary prince's consort is merely passing through. Xizhou leads directly to Chazhou, and it's a lot more convenient to head into Qidong from there. There is no need for your excellency to be overly worried. We are not enemies with Libei." Who would have guessed that such a spontaneous remark from Shun Zichuan would really hit the nail on the head? It was precisely to go to Qidong that Lu Yizhi headed south this time. Due to Lu Guangbai's desertion, Lu Pingyan had been implicated, and the imperial court had ordered him to be taken into custody for a trial. However, Qi Juin simply outright detained Yingxi, the army-inspecting eunuch of the Bianjuan commandery, and demanded an explanation from the Ministry of War on the grounds of Yingxi's repeated interference in military affairs of Bianjuan and involvement in the issue of Bianjuan's army provisions. At the same time, she took Lu Pingyan into her own camp to look after him. Qi Juin had sent a letter to Li Bei back in the 6th month, asking Shao Jiming to fetch Lu Pingyan away as soon as possible. This was a major case, and the crux lay in whether or not Lu Guangbai would throw in his lot with the 12 tribes of Bianxia. Dazhou currently could not receive any news regarding the Bianjuan commandery garrison troops, and by just looking at Lu Guangbai's act of penetrating deep into the desert, there was a high possibility of him defecting to the 12 tribes of Bianxia. The court minister's request to put Lu Pingyan on trial was meant to hold him hostage in Kudu, so that they would have the leverage to negotiate with Lu Guangbai in the future. The document relayed by the Ministry of War met with obstruction in Qidong, with Qi Juin turning a blind eye to it. At this juncture, the imperial bodyguards ought to have been the ones with the responsibility of carrying out the arrest on orders of the imperial edict. But the capture did not happen. When the Zhongba troops were defeated 6 years ago, it was on imperial edict orders that the imperial bodyguards led by Ji Lei detained Shen Zichuan for questioning. It required not only an arrest warrant, but also the official writ of arrest decreed by the Ministry of Justice at the behest of the emperor, as well as the emperor's orders in ink. After Li Jianheng's death, the Empress Dowager took over the mandate of heaven in his place. There was originally a plan for the Empress Dowager and Grand Secretariat to jointly issue the paperwork in place of approval personally penned by the emperor himself. However, Qi Juin did not accept this. She only acknowledged imperial orders personally issued by the emperor himself, and as long as the imperial bodyguards who went down to Qidong did not come bearing the imperial edict drafted from the hand of the emperor, she would not release Lu Pingyan. Han Qing, in personally leading the ceremonial guards of honor for the marriage between the Hua and Qi clans, was also meant to negotiate with Qi Juin. The remuneration offered by the Empress Dowager was rather generous, but no agreement was reached. As Kudu was now reliant on Qi Juin's military forces, they did not dare force Qi Juin to hand the man over. Shao Jiming had previously sent people over to inquire about the situation on the pretext of sending congratulatory gifts, to which Qi Juin had verbally given him an unequivocal answer. Lu Yizhi's current trip was thus for the precise purpose of fetching Lu Pingyan to Libei, and to help her father-in-law back at home find out the kind of person Shun Zichuan was while she was passing through. Shun Zichuan naturally could not allow Lu Yizhi to stay over at a relay station, which was rather unfitting of her status, so he made a special point of deploying people to tidy up the courtyard and invite Lu Yizhi to stay for the night in Xiaoqia's name. Lu Yizhi noted that the upturned eaves of the residence were all in a style that Xiaoqia was partial to, and the insides and outsides were both organized and well taken care of. She could not help recalling the letter Xiaoqia wrote to her before her departure, of which 3 pages were devoted to showering Shen Zichuan with praise. Lu Yizhi got off the horse carriage, and Ding Tao joyfully came over to greet her. Lu Yizhi was happy to see him and pulled him along as she gave him a once-over. Tao Zi has also grown a head taller now. Why didn't you return home with the second young master? Ding Tao replied, Master commanded me to stay put and stay by young master's side. Lu Yizhi called for the maidservant to bring candies for Ding Tao. She sat on the chair, put her hands together under her sleeves, and asked gently, Does the second young master often stay here? Ding Tao hemmed and hawed, having been cautioned by Qiao Tianya before, yet he also did not dare lie to the hereditary prince's consort. And so Lu Yizhi spoke in an even softer voice, When you were home last time, you'd often come over to ease my boredom. The grandson heir has always known of his Tao Zi Gij. He's constantly longing for you to come home and play with him. As she spoke, she turned slightly to the side, looking a little sad. It has been 6 years since we last saw our little Tao Zi, and he has grown so distant from me. Ding Tao hurriedly replied, No, not at all. Your ladyship treats me well. Even before I left for Kudu, you instructed Jin Ji to look after me. I remember it all. Lu Yizhi then turned back around and said, You're young. As the older brothers, it's their responsibility to take good care of you. When I heard about how Yi was constantly bullied in Kudu, I couldn't eat and kept tossing and turning all night long. I worried for a long time. On hearing this, Ding Tao immediately responded, Master wasn't injured when he left Kudu. The 8 great training divisions couldn't catch up to us, and that Han Jin who came after us is still locked up in jail. Your ladyship need not worry, Master is a very formidable man now. Since Yi is this impressive, Lu Yizhi worriedly spoke, Why did your journey take so long? The young master was injured, Ding Tao recounted. Master was trapped in the capital by Han Qing, and young master helped a great deal. But that Han Qing was truly an abominable one. He even used young master's teacher to threaten him. Young master didn't manage to save his teacher, and after leaving Kudu, he fell heavily ill. All the physicians along the way weren't any help, so we didn't dare to hurry. Lu Yizhi did not know who Shen Zichuan's teacher was, but she was alarmed to hear this, and her expressions betrayed some of her genuine concern as she asked, What happened after? Has he recovered? Ding Tao was unsure of how to explain this. He looks to have recovered, but Master and Grandpa both say he hasn't. The last time young Master was in Chazhou for business, he fell sick en route, and Master flew into a terrible rage when he came back. Lu Yizhi knew it. As expected, Xiaoqia did indeed come by often. I've never seen Yi angry. But Master was in a rush, and only stayed a night before he had to leave. Ding Tao thought about it for a moment before adding on in a small voice. He got in by somersaulting over the walls. Understanding dawned on Lu Yizhi, and she said, Then, are you happy staying here? If you want to go back with me, I'll bring you along. Ding Tao hesitated. He wanted to return to Libei, but he could not simply just let go of Cizhou either. He had made plans with Li Xiong to go fishing at the outskirts of the city in winter, and had also promised Ji Gang that he would learn a set of moves before the new year. Most importantly, Shen Zichuan never deducted his allowance, and he had never scolded him even when he kept the frogs in Shen Zichuan's courtyard. Lu Yizhi looked pensive on observing this. She patted Ding Tao on the head, and did not put him further in a spot. If Ding Tao was this hesitant, it meant that Shen Zichuan treated him very well, and this was proof that Shen Zichuan was not a difficult person to get along with. At the very least, he had exceptional patience with this half-grown youth. Lu Yizhi mused to herself. Here was a good-looking, domestic, patient, and loyal man who valued ties. Not only could he take care of domestic affairs, but he could also attend to official duties. He could keep Yi in check, and yet he was not overly domineering. His health wasn't the best, likely an old ailment from his earlier years in Kudu. And despite the many setbacks he had suffered in his life, he remained amiable and easygoing. Such a wonderful child. Luigi clapped her hands together and said in excitement, "Quick, prepare the brush and ink. I'll write a letter. Send it back to Dying Overnight, and have the hereditary prince deliver it to his lordship on the battleground once he's done reading it." As a man who was not in Luigi's immediate family given her status, Shun Zichuan could not pay his respects to her face-to-face, so he erected a screen in the courtyard to separate them. They had already learned that Luigi was transiting through and thus prepared a small feast to welcome this guest from afar, with Zhou Gui's wife as company during the meal. Madame Zhou was an astute one. She repeatedly praised Shin Zichuan to the skies during her private conversations with Luigi and picked a few incidents to recount to Luigi. Luigi's initial impression of the Shin clan had all been based on Shin Wei. It was Xiaoqie who sent her a letter overnight to gush on and on about Shin Zichuan's good points for a whole 3 pages. Eventually, he implicitly said that he had been beaten up by his old man at the battleground and even demoted. He also concealed the incident where he had been in danger at the Tudalong banner and merely said that he was injured, which made Luigi's heart ache so much that she did not want to reproach him further regarding this matter. Luigi was only staying over for 1 night. She still had to head south to Chazhou tomorrow. When the feast ended, she specifically summoned Shin Zichuan into the hall. The more she looked, the more good-looking she found him to be, and the more satisfied she was. Remembering Xiaoqie's mention of Shin Zichuan's past, as well as what she'd heard from Ding Tao, she could not help but feel tender affection for Shin Zichuan. Shin Zichuan thought the way the hereditary prince's consort looked at him was just like how one would look at a rabbit. She was as gentle as she could possibly be, as though being just a tad fiercer would send him into shock. "Vice Commander Shin," Luigi said in a soft, gentle voice, "I've imposed on you and caused you trouble, so I hope you can accept this gift as a gesture of my thanks and appreciation." Without even waiting for Shin Zichuan to answer, she gestured for the maidservant to present it to him. Contrary to his expectation, it was nothing rare, just satin in a box. As it was nothing valuable, Shin Zichuan did not turn it down after some polite civilities. But as he accepted it, he found the box heavy. When Shin Zichuan returned to the courtyard, he opened it to take a look. There were gold and jade bracelets cushioned at the bottom, all intricately inlaid and exquisitely crafted family heirlooms of quality workmanship. Fei Xing sneaked a peek from behind him and marveled if this weren't a set of family heirlooms meant to be passed down to a daughter-in-law. But he dared not vocalize his thoughts and silently shifted his gaze away, leaving Shin Zichuan to stand alone in place all puzzled. Chapter 157, Zhongxiong. Chapter 157. Zhongxiong. When Luigi left Sizhou the following day, Shin Zichuan had Fei Xing join her entourage with the imperial bodyguards and instructed him to escort her into the territory of Qidong. Official business that had yet to be finalized yesterday still had to be discussed further, and so everyone settled back into their respective seats in the study with the windows open. "This is the new document from last night for the Vice Commander's perusal, if you may." Zhou Gui presented the papers on the table. "We initially separated the registered citizens from the undocumented refugees and increased the severity of punishments, but during the discussion with Yuanzhua this morning, he proposed we continue keeping both groups together and not govern them separately. Post the notice up, and the issue of household registrations will be easily resolved." Yao Wenyu let out a couple of coughs. "It'll be unsuitable if we take the extra move of segregating them. It'll create unhappiness among the commoners who are newly registered, as well as make it difficult for the yamen to differentiate between the old and new when they carry out their duties." After reading through it, Shin Zichuan nodded. It'll be a disaster waiting to happen too if anyone tries to fish in troubled waters when the time comes. Since this matter is settled, the only issue left for us to handle before the end of the year is that of the surveillance of fields. The current land records of the fields in Tsijo were all measured during the reign of Yongi. They're too outdated. Tsijo has been reclaiming wastelands for 3 years in a row, and in truth, the acreage of land has seen a significant increase. We ought to have resurveyed the land last year, but manpower was lacking then, and Lei Changming was driving us into such a corner. That's why it has been delayed until now. Zhou Gui calculated the time. This task has to be completed before the end of the year, or errors will inevitably arise once the snow thickens. Tsijo now had plenty of yamen runners and constables, but capable government clerks and other lesser functionaries were few and far between. The advisors were mostly in charge of deliberating over official matters and were not responsible for the transcription of official documents, let alone sending them down to survey the lands. The yamen had a manpower shortage, and so did Shinzichuan. After the registration and classification of households, screen them on the spot. As long as they are literate, record them down on file first for future use, regardless of whether they are locals from Tsijo or non-natives from Danqing. When Shen Zichuan spoke to this point, he looked around the advisors. If someone has committed a crime in the past, we won't be able to find out if he doesn't declare it to us, so we have to be prudent during the screening and vetting process. Some may well see it as a business too, and it's inevitable that there will be people who attempt to curry favor with those in authority for personal gain. However, I trust that the various gentlemen here are all men of integrity who can distinguish between the crafty and the virtuous and do the right thing when it comes down to it. Given how frankly he had said it, who would still not understand? The seated advisors who were initially smoking their pipes all rose to their feet noisily. A few of them looked embarrassed, no longer daring to jest around again. The advisors were all Zhou Gui's honored guests with free access to the governmental office. Most of them were addressed as Mr., with their daily needs provided by Zhou Gui. There were only 2 ways that they could earn some spare cash. The first was to provide literary services, and the second was to attend the banquets of the local squires and elders, where they would be able to obtain monetary rewards from the household's masters. But now that they were in charge of recording the registrations and screening the lesser functionaries, there was no doubt some among the current flood of refugees into Tsijo would be thinking of pulling strings and sneaking them bribes on the sly. Gao Zhongxiong was one of the unlucky ones. After Han Jin was taken as prisoner, Gao Zhongxiong did not dare to return to Kudu for fear that Han Cheng would pursue the matter, so he relied on his connection to his maternal uncle in Danqing and remained in Danqing as Pan Yi's advisor. At first, Pan Yi had the intent to entrust him with heavy responsibility, but many of the plans and strategies he put forth were impractical theories that only looked good on paper, and so Pan Yi gradually gave him the cold shoulder. Bullied and humiliated by the servants in the Pan's residence, he had no choice but to return to his uncle's house. But when it rains, it pours, and his uncle fell to his death one night while in a drunken stupor. Gao Zhongxiong was a scholar who was too physically weak to carry out practical work, and his auntie, disdaining him for being useless, found an excuse to send him back to Yuzhou. Gao Zhongxiong felt ashamed to return home to face his elders and fellow townsfolk, so he thought of selling calligraphy and paintings to rent a few acres of low-yield land and do an imitation of a carefree immortal leading a simple and virtuous life far from the struggle for power and wealth. But who knew? He had not even worked in the field a couple of times after saving enough money to buy it when the field was forcibly seized by the local despot from the Fei clan. Gao Zhongxiong went to the yamen to lodge a complaint, and on that very same night, he was stopped by some men in the alley and beaten up. Even his house was robbed. Without a penny to his name, he was driven to the streets and reduced to beggary. He wanted to return to Yuzhou, but he had no traveling expenses. Left without an alternative, he fled Danqing with the other refugees and came to Tsijo, hoping to try his luck. Old Man Su, Gao Zhongxiong stood reservedly outside the door and hurriedly called out when he saw the man coming out. Any news about the matter from the yamen? To think he used to be an outstanding personage back in Kudu, but now, he had to humble himself when speaking to others. He wanted to ingratiate himself with the other man, but he was unwilling to overdo it due to his pride. However, standing fixed in place made him look rather out of place. The yamen runner with the surname Su brandished his yamen paddle too and shooed Gao Zhongxiong to a side. It was only when he turned back and could no longer see the interior of the yamen that he reproached Gao Zhongxiong in a hushed tone. "What are you doing here?" Gao Zhongxiong felt so humiliated from the admonishment that he could not lift his head. He clenched his sleeves and forced a smile when he managed to raise his head again. "I passed by the wine store ahead earlier, and I brought some over for you to quench your thirst. Here, have some." He presented the wine with both hands, continuing only when he saw the other man's expression soften some. "I've been in Suzhou for a few days. About that matter I spoke to you about the last time." "That matter? That matter?" Yamen runner Su drank the wine and denied it after wiping his mouth. "What matter?" "About getting a job in the yamen." Gao Zhongxiong did not lift his hand to wipe away the spittle on his face. "Please do me a favor and pass a message to the various advisors. Just say that I was formerly a student from Kudu who has received the Chief Surveillance Bureau, Sin. Oh, that matter. That can be easily arranged." Yamen runner Su moved in closer. "Prepare 3 taels of silvers, and I'll buy a few packs of tobacco for the various gentlemen. You'll be able to get past this hurdle then." Gao Zhongxiong was stunned for a moment, his expression a mixture of joy and sorrow. "I've already given it all to you. I have no more money." Yamen runner Su instantly turned hostile. The old man said, "How can you do anything without money? You think the gentlemen live on vegetables? They'll only acknowledge cold hard cash. If I hadn't taken pity on you and was willing to help you out, how could these silvers have been enough? No way it would have been enough." Gao Zhongxiong hastily tugged on Yamen runner Su's arm. "I've already given you a total of 7 taels of silver in all. You must have some news. You want to get in through the use of connections, but you can't bear to part with your money." Yamen runner Su threw the wine gourd into Gao Zhongxiong's arms and stretched his neck out to spat at him, his words contemptuous. "You know, even when you pee or shit, you still have to undo your belt." All of Gao Zhongxiong's money had been cheated out of him by Yamen runner Su, and since he had been hanging out with the group of refugees all day, he was as filthy as a beggar. As he looked at Yamen runner Su's mug now, he recalled the humiliation he experienced in dancing. In a fit of anger, he charged towards Yamen runner Su without a care, threw him one tight slap and yelled, "Since you didn't do what I asked, give me back my money." Yamen runner Su could not have imagined that Gao Zhongxiong would dare to hit him. He pointed at the tip of Gao Zhongxiong's nose. You, a despicable cheapskate like you dares to hit me?" As they exchanged blows, Yamen runner Su swung his yamen paddle at Gao Zhongxiong's waist, kicked him over to the ground, and whacked away at him viciously. Gao Zhongxiong, a mere scholar who had been starving for days, felt a stab of intense pain on his waist as one of the blows landed on an undetermined bone in his body. He rolled on the floor, covering his head as he attempted to dodge the blows, crying so hard he was out of breath. Even so, he still shouted, "Are you human? You cheated me out of my money. Are you still human?" With more people crowding over, Yamen runner Su did not dare stir up a big commotion, lest the yamen came to investigate. He tossed aside his yamen paddle and straddled on top of Gao Zhongxiong, then gripped his face by the jaw and shoved a towel used for wiping sweat into his mouth to gag him. Gao Zhongxiong was howling as he struggled, so Yamen runner Su slapped him ruthlessly multiple times until Gao Zhongxiong's ears were ringing and his vision blurred. Even the corners of his mouth were bleeding. "I'm on official business here," Yamen runner Su shouted to the crowd around him. This son of a bitch is a thief from Danching. I caught him the last time. To think he still dares come and seek revenge today." A sound escaped from Gao Zhongxiong's throat as Yamen runner Su dragged him by the collar towards the Yamen's entrance. The side of his cheek scraped against the ground, bloodied by the gravel. He reached his hand out towards those before him in a plea for help. Yamen runner Su kicked Gao Zhongxiong a few more times on the chest and abdomen. As Yamen runners, they were the most adept at running around detaining and summoning people for questioning. Teaching a frail scholar like Gao Zhongxiong a lesson was simply a piece of cake. As long as he dragged Gao Zhongxiong in today, and kept the latter gagged while he processed the latter with a thievery charge, he could throw him in jail. By then, all he had to do was to give the wardens he was on familiar terms with a heads-up, and Gao Zhongxiong would have it coming for him. Whether or not he could survive past the 8th month would all depend on Yamen runner Su's mood. At the same time the commotion was ongoing, Zhou Guo was returning with Shun Zichuan from the fields on the outskirts of the city. The horse carriage had been obstructed midway along the path, and he thought it was yet another instance of the refugees causing trouble. Shun Zichuan did not say a word. Zhou Guo hurriedly stepped off his own carriage and hoisted up the hem of his robe as he pushed through the crowd and asked, "What's going on? Who is kicking up a ruckus by the entrance of the Yamen?" Yamen runner Su immediately replied, "To answer your excellency, I've caught a thief. He not only refuses to submit but even hits others." For the past few days, Zhou Guo had been perturbed over the lack of public order in the city. He furrowed his brow at hearing this. "Even so, that's no way to handle the situation. What do you mean by beating up others in the streets? That's not right." He took a glance at Gao Zhongxiong. He initially intended to chastise him and educate him on the proprieties and morals. However, he remembered that Shun Zichuan's horse carriage was still obstructed at the back. They could not afford a delay, so he said, "Hurry and bring him in. Give him a proper trial once he has been cleaned up." Upon hearing this, Gao Zhongxiong started struggling with all his might and attempted to spit out the towel in his mouth. Yao Wenyu was currently discussing the reviews of the clerks and other lesser functionaries over these few days with Shun Zichuan. The carriage had remained stuck for a long time with no signs of movement. Qiao Tianya returned and lifted a corner of the curtain to report to Shun Zichuan. "Master, they're still making a ruckus. Let's take a detour." Shun Zichuan pushed the curtains higher with his folding fan and asked, "What's the matter?" "They're saying it's a thief. The Yamen runner arrested him on the streets." Qiao Tianya shifted his body slightly to give way. "I didn't see any calluses on his hands. He seems to be a scholar." Yao Wenyu, who rarely enjoyed being in noisy places now, looked over together with them. The area ahead was swarming with a crowd of people. He could see nothing at all. "Let's take a detour." Shun Zichuan released the drapes and let it fall. "Head straight to the Zhou's residence. There are still people waiting in the study. We have to discuss the matter of the mutual market before the hour of you." Qiao Tianya ordered the carriage driver to turn the horses around. As they were turning, they suddenly heard a heartbreaking wail from ahead. "You people are forcing me to my death. What kind of yamen is this? Oh heavens, do you have to reduce me, Gao Zhongxiong, to such straits?" Yao Wenyu abruptly lifted the drapes and said to Qiao Tianya, "Hold on, that person is Gao Zhongxiong, whose essays you have given pointers to before." He then looked towards Shun Zichuan. "He's the student who led 3,000 students from the Imperial College to denounce Pan Rugi that rainy night. Vice Commander, this person is of use to us." Chapter 158, Broken Jade. Chapter 158. Broken Jade. Lesser functionaries like clerks should not be confused with governmental officials. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy with no rank and were technically not considered officials. But they could write and count, and they were far more proficient in local law than the local officials, so they could dispose of all incriminating evidence and leave no traces for anyone to use against them whenever they oppressed, hoodwinked, and even extorted the local commoners. Furthermore, mutual cover-ups were prevalent, given the geographical limitations in place. When Luo Mu initially arrived at Chazhou, there were plenty of matters he did not manage to work on, and one of the reasons was that he was impeded by the functionaries of Chazhou. The local administration not only affected the officials' political track record, sometimes they could also become obstacles to the implementation of local policies. The imperial court had assigned a provincial surveillance commissioner to Zhongbua after the defeat of its troops, but Dunzhou had already lost the ability to control and hold the other 5 prefectures in check. Consequently, the corruption of local administrations in Zhongbua degenerated over the years to the point it was grim. Gao Zhongxiong had already been taken to a physician, and Zhou Gui was pacing the study. The advisors all sat in the partitioned area and waited silently with rapt attention for Shen Zichuan to speak. This matter concerned the screening of the functionaries, and it was also a question as to whether the yamen would be replacing its current yamen runners. Zhou Gui spoke in a grave tone. "We were just discussing this matter yesterday, and things have gone awry today. That old man Su is a yamen runner, and he has already obtained bribes over a dozen silver taels just for the screening of the functionaries alone. There are so many staff and subordinates from top to bottom in the yamen. If others are also conducting deals on this, then how many of the functionaries we employ as a result of this screening process will be truly of use?" Yao Wenyu drank the tea and said nothing as he put the lid back on. Anyone who was discerning could tell at a glance that this affair undoubtedly implicated Zhou Gui's advisors. Old man Su was just a yamen runner, yet he dared to take advantage of the opportunity presented to make a quick buck. This would not have been doable for him at all, not unless someone was in communication with him from behind the scenes. Yao Wenyu was Shen Zichuan's advisor. If he were to speak up and ask for them to deal with the matter severely, he would be suspected of trying to supplant Zhou Gui's advisors. In all the recent discussions, he had remained secure in the seat by Shen Zichuan's side as his counsel, but he was a newcomer, and he could not compare in terms of seniority. The reputation of unpolished Jade Yuanjua had reached far and wide. Others treated him as an immortal when he had been beyond their reach, but now that he had fallen, they treated him as a live target. Criticism among peers was a minor affair, but if this led to friction between Shen Zichuan and Zhou Gui, it would be to the detriment of Cizhou. As the saying goes, every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt its debtor. Shen Zichuan weighed his folding fan in his chair, his expression unreadable as he sat on the chair. "Whoever did it, just deal with said person in accordance with the standard procedure. The screening process is no small matter, and there is plenty at stake. We cannot end up hurting the various diligent and hard-working gentlemen because of paranoia." The advisors in the partitioned area did not dare make a sound, although a few inwardly let out sighs of relief. Shen Zichuan was in Cizhou. He still had to count on Zhou Gui's power and influence, so it was only to be expected for him to handle the matter with care. It was still salvageable if the administration was corrupt, but it was obviously not a good time now. If they cracked down too hard and ended up implicating over half of Cizhou's yamen by following the trail, then how were they going to get any work done when all the functionaries and subordinates' positions have been emptied out? Conversely, Zhou Gui was reluctant now. "Vice Commander, it is precisely because it's no small matter that it has to be investigated. We cannot let people ruin the ethos of the yamen. If others were to imitate this behavior in the future, then it's still the commoners who will suffer. Of course, it has to be investigated. What I meant is for us to go by the book." Shen Zichuan called for someone to steep the tea, then continued, "Old man Su has already been taken into custody. If your excellency doesn't feel reassured, then, by all means, send someone you can trust to sit in and transcribe it down. With the imperial bodyguards conducting the trial, there will be results by tonight. Baseless accusations cannot be trusted, but conclusive evidence cannot be disregarded either. Whoever wants to violate the regulations of the yamen, then, will have to bear the responsibility for their actions. Wasn't the newly transcribed penal laws just posted? This incident came at the right time. Your Excellency can set up court and hold the trial before the citizens of Tsizhou. The more turbid the waters, the more they have to be sifted clear. But once the case concludes, we must never take inaccurate rumors for truth and jump to conclusions. The yamen does not do anything that will implicate the innocent. Zhou Gui said, "This matter must be taken as a warning." Shen Zichuan replied, "But of course, those who are lightly punished shall be dismissed from their position, and those who are severely punished shall be exiled to barren lands. If public sentiment runs high, an on-the-spot execution in the court can also serve to bring immense satisfaction to all." A crash rang out from the partitioned area, and the stunned gasps of the advisers suddenly rose. Zhou Gui hurriedly asked, "What's the matter?" A few people responded, "Your Excellency, someone fainted." They initially assumed that Shen Zichuan meant to punish only Old Man Su and show mercy to the rest of them, but who would have thought that Shen Zichuan wanted to make an example out of them? The imperial bodyguards were the ones presiding over the interrogation, so how could an old chap from the countryside like Old Man Su withstand it? Not implicating the innocent meant not pursuing the matter for the others, but not a single one of the parties involved in Old Man Su's case this time was going to get away with it. The more those sitting in the partitioned area listened, the more seized with terror they became, so much that when Shen Zichuan uttered the 4 words on-the-spot execution, one of them promptly passed out cold. It was a state of pandemonium in the study. On the other side, Gao Zhongxiong was grimacing in pain under the hands of the physician. After the physician left, he changed into a clean set of clothes with the help of the maidservants. He was one to keep himself in good health back in Kudu, so even if he was starving right now, he dared not gobble down his meal. After he was done eating, the maidservants led Gao Zhongxiong to the courtyard. On the way there, he did not dare to look around. He knew Shen Zichuan was now residing in Tsizhou, and he felt rather apprehensive. For someone who had given Han Jin counsel on the pursuit and capture of Shaoqie, coming to Tsizhou could be said to be a risky, last-ditch move. Gao Zhongxiong entered the courtyard and saw that the jasmine orange beyond the wooden railing of the covered walkway had all withered. No one had swept away the blanket of white petals on the ground. Presumably, it was on the specific instruction of the master of the house to allow its natural fragrance to remain lingering in the air. Meanwhile, the green moss and gravel stone left along the edge of the pond bridge made it appear as though it was paved with a new, visually pleasing mattress. Gao Zhongxiong ascended the stairs as he peeked at it, and in a moment of inattention, he nearly slipped. After he awkwardly braced himself up, he hurriedly bowed to the maidservants in front who were snickering behind covered mouths, sweating profusely as he repeated the bows. Wind chimes dangled beneath the eaves. Ding Tao waited for Gao Zhongxiong to come over before he lifted the curtains for him and led him inside. Gao Zhongxiong did not know Ding Tao's identity, and so did not dare to offend him. Instead, he lifted the hem of his own robe, intending to stride in, only to realize that there was no threshold in this room. The interior of the hall was bright and spacious, with no valuable ornaments. When Gao Zhongxiong was in Kudu, he often heard that Shen Zichuan kept company with Shi Hongxian and the rest and was fond of extravagance, carrying small ivory fans on him all the time. Thus, he guessed that the owner of this residence was perhaps Zhou Gui. Gao Zhongxiong sat upright, all prim and proper, his butt barely touching the edge of the chair as he focused and paid close attention to the signs of movement in the courtyard. A short moment later, he suddenly heard the sound of wheels from the courtyard. Ding Tao, who had been under the eaves, stepped out to greet young master. The curtain was lifted up, and Gao Zhongxiong promptly rose to his feet. However, the first one to enter was not Shen Zichuan or Zhou Gui, but a tall, unconventional bodyguard. This bodyguard did not look at Gao Zhongxiong. Instead, He leaned over to take over the wheelchair, and pushed in a young master dressed in green with an overcoat draped over him. Gao Zhongxiong was about to go by the propriety and kneel, but then, when he got a clear look at who was in the wheelchair, he could not help but gape with wide-opened eyes. Then he took a step back and exclaimed in shock, "Yao! Yuanzhua!" This exclamation put a frown onto the face of Shun Zichuan, who entered after the two. He removed his overcoat and made a beeline for the seat of honor. Qiao Tianya pushed Yao Wenyu to the front, and the maidservants came forth to serve the tea. Yao Wenyu held the teacup in his hands and said with a neutral expression, "It has been a long time. I didn't expect Shenwei to come to Cizhou too." For some reason, Gao Zhongxiong broke out in a cold sweat. He dabbed at his sweat and uttered a sound of acknowledgement. Not daring to continue looking Yao Wenyu in the eyes, he hastily paid his respects to Shun Zichuan. Your Excellency." Shun Zichuan found this man's expression odd. After he took his seat, he said, "There's no need to be so formal. Take a seat." How would Gao Zhongxiong dare to? Since Shenwei knows who the vice-commander is, then there is no need for me to waste my breath. Yao Wenyu initially wanted to introduce Gao Zhongxiong to Shun Zichuan, but on seeing how deathly pale Gao Zhongxiong was, he paused and changed his tone to soothe him. "Shenwei, don't be afraid. I'm a living man." Gao Zhongxiong still did not dare to look up and merely repeated, "Yes." Shun Zichuan asked, "Yuanzhua, what makes you say that?" Yao Wenyu was succinct in his answer. "I had a chance encounter with Shenwei in Danqing once. The poison and my injuries acted up simultaneously at that time and gave him a scare." But Gao Zhongxiong looked nervous. It was clearly not as simple as a chance encounter. After Yao Wenyu had his legs broken and left the capital, he went to Danqing, where he received the care of Pan Yi and the commandery princess Zhaoyue. He was apparently poisoned in Danqing, although he had never told anyone the story behind it. Gao Zhongxiong, however, knew about it. "I left Danqing in such a hurry. Are the commandant and commandery princess well?" Yao Wenyu asked. At Yao Wenyu's tone, Gao Zhongxiong gradually relaxed enough for him to answer smoothly, but he was still turned to the side and did not dare to look at Yao Wenyu. "Yes, they are both fine." Shun Zichuan could sense something from this exchange. The maidservants had all retreated, while Ding Tao was striking the wind chimes for fun under the eaves. They clinked and clanked noisily, as if a gale was wreaking havoc. Qiao Tianya lifted the curtain to chase Ding Tao away, and it finally quietened down on the other side of the beaded curtain. Yao Wenyu seemed neither happy nor unhappy to hear this piece of news. He set aside his teacup and broke the silence to say to Shun Zichuan, "When I arrived in Danqing, the commandery princess was looking after me, but she is, after all, a married woman, and there were many areas that was inconvenient for her to intervene with." The commandant thus sought out Pan Yuan, who was still living at home at that time. This Pan Yuan is the commandant's younger brother of common birth. Pan Yuan was an idler who loafed around all day. He was fond of gambling, but he was not a direct descendant of lawful birth from the Pan clan, so he could only rely on Pan Yi and his wife to repay the huge debt he owned. Pan Yi had him take care of Yao Wenyu, hoping that he could be inspired to emulate the virtuous and better himself. Furthermore, Pan Yuan had been very dedicated to taking care of their father in the past and could be considered a filial son. At first, Pan Yuan could be said to be attentive. With commandery princess Zhaoyue's exhortations, he did not dare to be shoddy in his treatment of Yao Wenyu. He did not have to do anything personally, either. All he had to do was watch the physicians and attendants to ensure that they were timely with the meals and medicine and that they were not loafing off on the job. But after time, Pan Yuan got tired and fed up with it and started to find excuses to venture outdoors to gamble. Pan Lin used a prisoner's body as a decoy, but this move did not dispel Xue Xiuzhou's suspicions. The commandery princess left in a hurry back then, and it was inevitable for there to be spies in her entourage. Yao Wenyu continued. The gambling den later came hounding Pan Yuan for payment, and Pan Yuan went into hiding all over. He did not dare to tell his family, so he often poured out his woes to me. But I was penniless, and I was in no position to help even if I wanted to. Gao Zhongxiong nodded. Pan Yuan sought me out at that time to borrow money too. He said he had been forced into a corner. Despite selling off the fields belonging to his branch of the family, he still could not pay off his debt. I advised him to tell the commandant as soon as possible before it was too late, but he simply refused to. Yao Wenyu did not speak again when Gao Zhongxiong spoke to this point. Gao Zhongxiong continued, in less than half a month, Pan Yuan suddenly came to me for a drink. He said his gambling debt had been fully paid off, as he had met a benefactor who had extended him help. I was worried he had been deceived by the gambling den, so I sounded him out during the feast about this benefactor. He only said this person was a Longyu merchant too from Kudu who had asked him to run an errand for him. Another half a month passed. Yao Wenyu's injuries not only did not heal, but had instead even deteriorated further. Commandery Princess Zhaoyue asked all the physicians at home, but Yao Wenyu's condition showed no improvement. At that time, Pan Lin suffered a setback in Kudu, and even Pan Yi was impeached along with him. The issue at hand turned out to be about the Pan clan's fields in Danqing. Pan Xiangjie did not dare to speak up for his sons, fearful that the matter would snowball into disproportionate proportions. But even the Pan clan's repeated concessions did not manage to stop this storm from blowing their way, and the imperial censors got so heated that they vehemently demanded Pan Lin to be suspended pending trial. There was indeed an issue with the Pan clan, but that was a debt born out of Pan Xiangjie's greed. The reason Pan Lin bore the brunt of it was rather obvious. It was because he harbored Yao Wenyu. But he acted in a fit of pique at this injustice, adamant on fighting Xue Xiuzhua till the end. It did not take long for Pan Xiangjie to learn of the inside story. Fearing that the Pan clan would be implicated, he wrote a letter overnight to Pan Yi, who was in Danqing, and demanded him to send Yao Wenyu back to Kudu as soon as possible. Pan Yi refused, and so Pan Xiangjie blew his top and subsequently became bedridden in illness, putting Pan Yi in a dilemma. At the same time, the Commandery Princess Zhaoyue noticed the oddness of Yao Wenyu's condition and grew suspicious, so she bypassed the front hall and got her personal maid to call over a physician from outside the residence to take a look. Yao Wenyu had no wish to get into the details. After a moment of silence, he merely said, "The Commandery Princess was worried that Kudu would use the matter of inspecting the fields as a pretext to come over and capture me. She initially wanted to send me to the manor that came as part of her dowry to recuperate, but there were problems with the medicine, and she could no longer trust the people in the Pan's residence. So she prepared traveling expenses and entrusted someone with the task of sending me secretly to Jincheng, where my late teacher's longtime friends still reside. But misfortune never comes singly. The people in his entourage saw that Yao Wenyu was not only seriously ill but also had both his legs broken, so after they left the city, they forgot all that the Commandery Princess Zhaoyue had entrusted to them and ran away with the traveling expenses and horse carriage under cover of the night. That night, Yao Wenyu was thrown into the wilderness. All that remained other than the donkey was the cat. He used to sleep in the wild with Mother Earth as his pillow when he was wandering the mountains and plains, but the experience of it this time was completely poles apart. For the first time in his 24 years of life, he realized that he was nothing. He was a nobody once his reputation was stripped from him. Unpolished jade Yuanzhua. It was at that moment Yao Wenyu loathed these words to the core. They were like humiliation branded deep into his bone marrow. In the wilderness, Yao Wenyu broke down and cried inconsolably. For his teacher and for himself. He refused to see anyone when he was in Danqing, merely lying all day long on that bed shrouded in dimness. His legs were the ones that hurt, but his self-esteem was the one that had shattered. He had to face up to the fact that he was no longer able to take care of himself. All that carefree spirit of his had turned into a thing of the past. Such were his dreams for each sleep he took, and it remained the same when he woke. He was broken through and through. He still wanted to live. Chapter 159. Nameless. Chapter 159. Nameless. There was something amiss with Yao Wenyu's medicine. The physicians from the Pan's residence could not figure out what was wrong, but this no doubt had something to do with Pan Yuan, considering that he had been the one taking care of Yao Wenyu. The commandery Princess Zhaoyue later checked on the Longyu merchant who had paid off Pan Yuan's debt, but the other party had long disappeared without a trace. Not long after Yao Wenyu left, Pan Yuan fell off his horse and died, and thus, the trail leading to the identity of the person who instigated him to poison Yao Wenyu hit a dead end. However, Pan Lin had the blame pinned on Shuexiuzhua, and both parties' relationship in Kudu continued to deteriorate. Gao Zhongxiong sensed the atmosphere in the room growing tense. When he remembered he was also on friendly terms with Pan Yuan, he felt as though he was sitting on pins and needles, worried that Yao Wenyu would blame him for it by association. The silence was too much for him to bear, and he could not help breaking it. Although I am acquainted with Pan Yuan, we do not share the same ideals. All the typical exchange of formalities over wine we had are merely a matter of necessity. He was not adept at flattery and stumbled over his words. On the contrary, I am in admiration of Yuanzhua's talent. We once had an encounter over a poetry meet during the reign of Xianda, and Yuanzhua's talent and bearing were so out of this world that it was truly an ethereal sight to behold. Yao Wenyu waited for Gao Zhongxiong to finish before he calmly said, "The past is but a dream, it's all now water under the bridge. It's fate that we can meet again in Cizhou alive. Now that I've found a good master, may I ask what plans you have for the future?" Gao Zhongxiong stole a glance at Shinzichuan. What plans could I even have now that I've been reduced to such a state? He revealed a bitter smile as he spoke. I've made a laughingstock of myself with my behavior today. I've persevered in my studies for so many years, but in the end it has all come to nothing. Shinzichuan clasped his folding fan under his sleeve. The room felt chilly to him. It was time to get someone to prepare the hand warmer. He pulled his wandering mind back in an instant, his jade earring turning to the side slightly as he spoke politely to Gao Zhongxiong. The political climate is currently unstable, and the various heroes are fighting over themselves to make a play for the top. Since Mr. Xunwei has come to Cizhou, why don't you reside temporarily in my residence, and take your time to decide? Gao Zhongxiong could not help feeling greatly touched when he heard Shinzichuan calling him Mr. Xunwei. He had been through a lot of hardships on this life journey of his, and the masters he had successively encountered and served had not been good masters. And so he stood up and bowed deeply to Shinzichuan, his words even more awkward and inarticulate. Shinzichuan comforted him a little, and it was an hour later before Gao Zhongxiong withdrew. Yao Wenyu looked at the bamboo blinds falling back into place. He waited until Gao Zhongxiong had walked out of the walkway before he asked, "Does the vice-commander find this man to be of no use?" Even if Shinzichuan truly thought so, he could not say it outright. "Thus," he answered, "he must have his forte for you to recommend him to this extent." "That's right," Yao Wenyu said. "Gao Zhongxiong's courtesy name is Xunwei, and he has always been known as the Eloquent Brush when he was in the Imperial College. Back then, when Shi Hongxian was setting the storm in motion in Kudu by inciting the Imperial College, he chose Gao Zhongxiong precisely because of the latter's penmanship. Gao Zhongxiong was a student who entered the capital in the 4th year of Xianda, which coincided with the defeat of Zhongbu's troops. It was a scene of devastation everywhere in the 6 prefectures then, and the lamentation of Chaucer, he wrote under the influence of wine, caused the students to fall over themselves to transcribe private copies for distribution. When it made its way into Tsingyu's hands, it even made Tsinyu shed tears by the candlelight, deeply moved as he was. Shinzichuan drank the tea and said, "So that's how it is." The Imperial College's disturbance that Shi Hongxian had facilitated was, in fact, instigated by Shen Zichuan. Gao Zhongxiong led the students to demand answers for Shen Zichuan's release from the temple and ended up being forcibly quelled by Pan Rugi and Ji Lei. This led to a turnabout of the then students' direction, turning the entire farce into a dispute between them and the Pan faction. Ji Lei and the others were caught off guard before they could act, and subsequently, they lost the initiative to land a decisive blow on Shen Zichuan to take him down. Shen Zichuan himself knew best what had played a key role in that fiasco, including the Imperial College uproar that Xue Xiuzhua had later stirred up again. They had both gotten a firm grasp on the inclination of the public sentiments before herding them into moving in the direction they wanted. To do this, compelling rhetoric and articles that had the power to move men were the most indispensable. Yao Wenyu's meaning was clear. Gao Zhongxiong's writing had such power. He could stir up a storm, and it was precisely such literary prowess that Shen Zichuan was in need of right now. The Chazhou trip has made the vice commander a well-known name, but because of the taint that is Shen Wei, it's still far from enough if you want to lead and command the various heroes in an open and above-board manner. Yao Wenyu paused for a moment. Even if the full story of the defeat from start to end is made public in the future, it had still proved to be hard for Shen Wei to be absolved of blame. An ill reputation lends no weight to one's words. This was a problem that Shen Zichuan could not circumvent. King Yi of Fanzhou was currently drafting up documents to attack and vilify Cizhou, and he had made reference to the defeat multiple times. Shen Wei's withdrawal from battle without so much a fight was a fact, and there was no way to refute that even if Zhou Gui wanted to. Firstly, Shen Zichuan was indeed Shen Wei's eighth son of common birth. He was Shen Wei's son by blood, and the so-called unfavored treatment he had received held no water in quelling the anger of the public. That was a blood relation, one unlike Fei Xing with a remote common birth connection, where a glib tongue was all that was needed to convince the people. Secondly, the defeat of the troops was a tragedy caused by Hua Xiqian and the rest's attempts to fill up the void in the state treasury, but the evidence had all been destroyed. Shen Wei committed suicide by self-immolation, Hua Xiqian died in prison, and Wei Huaigu succumbed to poison. Not a single trace was left of their collusion with the Bianxia cavalry to sell out Dazhou's military defense map. This was the dark cloud that was constantly hanging over Shen Zichuan's head. It was also his greatest pitfall. He had risen to power in Cizhou, but why was he faced with such a scarcity of talents? Because the talents of the world refused to come to him. They'd rather follow heroes like King Yi who had risen in rebellion among the common people than throw in their lots with Shen Zichuan. The vice commander executed an advisor of Cizhou today, and it's only by holding the trial publicly that the vice commander's name did not fall into further disrepute. But with the rise of Cizhou and the allegiance of Chazhou, the vice commander must first drop the title of vice commander if the vice commander wishes to advance a step further. Noting Shen Zichuan's neutral expression as he fiddled with his folding fan, Yao Wenyu knew then that Shen Zichuan had already considered this, so he continued, Cizhou has long freed itself from Kudu's control. Using the former title makes it all too easy to confound the status of master and subordinate. It's no longer apt to keep the address, vice commander. By the time Yao Wenyu had spoken to this point, both men had reached a tacit understanding. Shen Zichuan could be addressed as vice commander, or even judge. Those were his titles in the imperial bodyguards, although they were rendered void when he left Kudu. He was now in Cizhou, and Cizhou's prefectural prefect was Zhou Gui. If he had no new form of address, it would imply that he was still the guest and Zhou Gui was the host and the master. The offending advisors could still remain securely seated in place in the partitioned area despite what had happened at the Yamen because they still treated Zhou Gui as the master of Cizhou. They did not see themselves as subordinate to Shen Zichuan. There was still a line between both parties. Only Kong Ling had long since recognized the problem. He brought this to Zhou Gui's attention before he set off for Chazhou the last time, and he had reminded Zhou Gui again when he set off for Huaizhou this time. But Zhou Gui truly was not well acquainted with the ins and outs of the matter, and that was why he had been slow to react. Sun Sichuan could not proclaim himself king, at least, not now. King Yi of Fanzhou established himself so early that he was literally the prey standing right in front of Qidong. Qi Juin already had the time to catch a breather and get back in the game. Once she filled in the gap at Bianjuan Commandery, she would have spare resources to deploy troops to Zhongbua, and the first one she was going to fight would be these random kings that had risen from among the common people. There are benefits to being nameless nobodies. Sun Sichuan leaned back slightly. At least if Qi Juin dispatches troops without any justifiable cause, she would not be able to bypass the other 5 prefectures to come after Cizhou. Cizhou did not have bandits or self-proclaimed kings. Xiao Qie, who commanded the imperial army, was the one the 8 great training divisions were pursuing. Sun Sichuan was at most a fugitive, and Cizhou was at most harboring a fugitive. Zhou Gui had not openly and blatantly hung up the rebel flag, and he was still the prefect in the territory. His turning of a deaf ear to Kudu's orders could be put down to the long distance between Cizhou and Kudu, and just based on this alone, Qi Juin could not attack Cizhou, not unless she used the suppression of bandits as a pretext to route her troops to the western side of Cizhou, then entered Cizhou with the excuse that she was just transiting through. However, the deployment of troops like this meant that the military expenditure required would increase exponentially, and Kudu might not necessarily be able to spare the money. The best option was still for the 8 great training divisions to deploy their troops. They had support for provisions from Danqing and were located close enough, and they could also use the reason of tracking down Sun Sichuan to take him in for questioning to launch a war with Cizhou. But Han Jin was too impatient. Not only were his troops broken up by Xiao Qie, he was also beaten silly by Xiao Qie. This consequently led the 8 great training divisions into cowering back. But such a situation could not last for long, because the 8 great training divisions were bound to stage a comeback. Once the 3 parties in Kudu entered a period of stability, the Ministry of War would re-elect a new chief commander. It was to guard against this situation that Xiao Qie and Sun Sichuan purchased the Beiyuan hunting grounds from Zhou Gui for use as the imperial army's camp. This way, a 20,000-strong imperial army would be the shield at the west of Cizhou, used for the specific purpose of resisting the 8 great training divisions. But at the same time, the imperial army only had to return to Cizhou's territory, and Qi Juin would be able to head north and launch a direct assault on Cizhou on the grounds of eliminating the rebel forces. Therefore, Sun Sichuan was in no hurry to get rid of King Yi of Fanzhou. He wanted King Yi to be the mountain that straddled between him and Qidong. However, he could not allow King Yi to expand unchecked either. I once made a proposal for the vice commander to take down Fanzhou swiftly, but it's no longer a good time now. The tea in Yao Wenyu's palm had cooled. He continued, if the vice commander wants to keep King Yi going, then you have to first hack off the hand he is reaching out to the north with. A few months ago, Sun Sichuan's eyes were clear. Lei Jingzhe was sent back to Mount Luo by Suan, where he became the target of public censure and could no longer command the bandits, resulting in chaos on Mount Luo as the various internal factions turned against one another. Now that King Yi wants to form an alliance with Mount Luo, Lei Jingzhe, who wholeheartedly wants to stage a comeback, will not miss this opportunity. Something stirred in Yao Wenyu's eyes. He said, Vice Commander means to. Sun Sichuan suddenly opened his folding fan and partially covered his face. With a smile in his eyes, he slowly said, I'm going to give him a helping hand. The wind had picked up outside the window. It looked like it was about to rain again. Han Jin gouged away at the walls until his 10 fingers were scraped bare. He had been in the Cizhou prison for close to 3 months, and he had gotten so emaciated he was barely recognizable. What's more, he still had to put up with verbal abuse and insults from the others. At first, he could not stand it, and he would even cry himself a river, but as time passed, he gradually grew numb. Mealtime. Carrying a tub in hand, the warden knocked on the cell doors one at a time with a wooden spoon and hollered, "It's mealtime!" They were adept at this, and could swiftly dish out the broth and rice, filling the bowl to the brim without missing a drop. On hearing his voice, Han Jin hurried over to the cell door and reached out for the bowl. Unexpectedly, the warden passing by behind kicked the bowl over, sending the mixture of rice and broth spilling all over the ground. Han Jin was so hungry he was having gastric pains. He kneeled and pinched up the rice on the ground with his fingers and desperately shoved them into his mouth. There were grains of sand and gravel among the rice, which made his teeth ache as he chomped down on them. He pressed his head against the cell door and reached into his mouth with his dirty hand to dig out the stones. As he was doing so, he suddenly saw a pair of legs stopping at the other end of the cell door. Han Jin carefully lifted his eyes and looked out evasively. Gao Zhongxiong, who had initially meant to come and take a look at his former master, never expected Han Jin to be reduced to such a state. Han Jin was Han Cheng's younger brother, and he could be said to have been a free-spirited young master in Kudu. He succeeded Shi Guan as the viceroy of the 8 great training divisions, and he had also been there in person during the public ditches case and gone into the waters. At that time, he had great respect for Shao Qie. Gao Zhongxiong felt a lump in his throat. There were several times he wanted to open his mouth and speak, but words failed him. Han Jin looked blankly at Gao Zhongxiong, then abruptly pounced over to grab the bars and ask in a tearful voice, "Is my elder brother here? Tell me, has my elder brother come?" Chapter 160, Rumor. Chapter 160. Rumor. Shocked by Han Jin, Gao Zhongxiong took a couple of steps back and bumped into the bars behind him. Han Jin could not even stand the mosquito bites when he marched to war, much less endure the dirty conditions in prison. It was very much against his will to end up in such a plight. When he saw Gao Zhongxiong's expression, he could not help but burst out wailing, "You treacherous man! It's all your fault I'm in this state." Gao Zhongxiong dared not respond and stuck close to the bars as he headed for the entrance. Feeling his hatred rise, Han Jin launched into a torrent of abuses. "You threw in your lot with traitor Shun. How shameless! You disloyal, turncoat slave who panders to a traitor. One Gao Zhongxiong, you're just a wretched soul with nobody to turn to. Don't go, come back you." Gao Zhongxiong cut a sorry figure as he pushed the prison door open and shook off that relentless, haunting voice behind him. Outside, the chilly wind blew his entire back cold. The literati cherished their reputation. Who didn't want to go down in history as an honorable scholar untainted by political ills? To the words disloyal, turncoat slave dealt such a hard blow to Gao Zhongxiong that he almost could not get back up on his feet. He had tens of thousands of grievances pent up in his chest with nowhere to vent, and they eventually amassed into a wave of nausea so overwhelming that he grabbed at the wall and threw up. Gao Zhongxiong threw up everything he had consumed that day, puking until he had a case of acid reflux. He leaned against the wall, gradually sliding into a sitting position on the ground. As he gazed towards the vast sky, he thought of his elders back in Yuzhou. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, but the tears would not stop streaming down his cheeks, so he wiped them with his sleeve instead. Eventually, he hugged his arms, rolled over to curl up in a corner, and cried while trying to suppress it. Who would be willing to give up his dignity and bow to power for a pittance? Not Gao Zhongxiong. But without this pittance, he would die. In order to seek a way out for himself, he even cast aside his sensibilities. If someone were to tell him 5 years ago that he would bow obsequiously to a yamen runner for the sake of being a lesser functionary in the future, he would rather die. But he had not only done that now. He was even willing to learn to flatter others for petty gains. An unspecified amount of time later, Gao Zhongxiong got up, tidied himself, and edged along the wall as he made his way outside. As he passed by the yamen, he had the sense that the whisperings around him were directed at him, but he did not seem to feel a thing. Like what Yao Wenyu had said, the past was but a dream. He had woken up too. This humble one is Gao Zhongxiong, and my humble courtesy name is Xinwei. Gao Zhongxiong strode into the yamen and bowed as he said to the others. It is on the personal recommendation of the vice commander that this humble one has come to offer my writing skills for the yamen's use. In the future, this humble one shall be responsible for drafting up all the official proclamations and public notices the yamen needs. In the twinkling of an eye, it was already the end of the 8th month. Kong Ling and Yu Xiaozai had returned from their trip to Huaizhou. The discussion in Huaizhou had gone smoothly. The only odd thing was that when they passed by Luoxia Pass on the way back, they found the attitude of the Luoxia Pass's commandant loaded with subtleties. It was far more agreeable than it had been when they passed through on their way to Huaizhou. That commandant from Luoxia Pass, Yu Xiaozai said, was trying to dig for information on our vice commander. He made several inquiries on the vice commander's marriage. He couldn't be trying to play matchmaker for the vice commander, could he? Zhou Gui thought of Shao Qie and hurriedly asked, "Then, how did you answer?" "I initially wanted to answer that the vice commander already has a spouse. Yu Xiaozai had darkened a lot on this trip. But Qingfeng advised me not to, so I just replied that he was still unmarried." Both of them did not understand, but Kong Ling was a discerning and insightful man. He had heard that the hereditary prince's consort of Li Bei had come to Cizhou, so he paid special attention to Luoxia Pass's attitude on their return trip. He knew very well the reason for the change in their attitude. No doubt Li Bei had reached out to them in advance, wanting to understand Shen Zichuan through them. He just did not know if it was the prince or the hereditary prince. Kong Ling picked up the tea and said, "The vice commander isn't married to begin with. It's better to say it as it is when it comes to this matter, lest it provides others with grounds for gossip and leads to misunderstandings." Zhou Gui was just about to speak to Kong Ling about the screening of the functionaries from the last time when Qiao Tianya lifted the curtains. They rose to greet in unison, "Vice Commander." It was raining outside, and Shen Zichuan had walked all the way over from his residence. Even if he had an umbrella, it was inevitable for him to get wet. On the contrary, Yao Wenyu was all securely bundled up as he was pushed in. The only thing was that he was too thin, and even when he sat in the wheelchair, he did not feel like a living being. Gao Zhongxiong came in last after them. He was dressed very simply, with a pile of books in his arms and half of his shoulder wet. "Gentlemen, please take a seat." Shen Zichuan settled into his seat and wiped away the water droplets on his hand with his handkerchief. "It has been hard on Mr. Qingfeng and Yu Jing on this long trip. There's no need to be in a hurry to return to duty these few days. Take a break." Kong Ling and Yu Xiaozai said their thanks in succession. "Xinwei, do sit too. There's no need to be formal." Shen Zichuan lifted a palm to motion to Gao Zhongxiong. At the same time, he said to Kong Ling, "This is Xinwei, a new subordinate of mine who specializes in writing. He is presently gaining experience in the yamen, and there are still plenty of many matters on which he will need Mr. Qingfeng's guidance on." Kong Ling politely and humbly played down the accolade and sized up Gao Zhongxiong. Gao Zhongxiong had secured his hair up in a simple bun today. As he had to move around in the yamen for the whole day now, efficiency had taken precedence over everything else, and so he no longer looked so much like a scholar. Gao Zhongxiong set down the books and bowed to Kong Ling in a greeting. "I've long heard much of Mr. Qingfeng's reputation. It's an honor to meet you." Kong Ling rose to his feet and returned the greeting. Shen Zichuan waited until they each took their respective seats before saying, "With things going smoothly in Huaizhou and Chazhou, everyone can have a good year this year. The functionaries to survey the fields have already been sent down. To ensure the accuracy of the acreage, there will be 2 more checks carried out after. By the time this is done, it will be the end of the year, but the good thing is that we can finish the surveillance in time for this year. Now that the recording of registrations is done, The moving of Tsizhou's autumn harvest into the granaries is completed too. As soon as the snow falls, we should discuss the allocation of land. Yao Wenyu spoke up just then. In the past, the land taxes and levies in Kudu were all paid in kind. After the grain was collected and put into storage at the granaries, it was manually audited and converted by people. The labor costs of the transport office also had to be apportioned among them, so it might not necessarily be accurate. We are now in Tsizhou, and we can dispense with the escort and transportation of grains. But to increase the expenses for the upkeep of the granary, the most appropriate way to collect silver would be to combine the miscellaneous taxes. The trading of grains is not a long-term endeavor either. Kong Ling said, once Chazhou is done with the reorganization this year, they can start tilling their lands at the beginning of spring next year. If they can get through it, it will be a bumper harvest for them, and they will no longer need to do business with us. Wouldn't the other 4 prefectures need it? Yu Xiaozai was not as familiar with the situation in Zhongbua as the rest of them. Seems to me that King Yi won't be in the running for long. The 2 prefectures of Fanzhou and Dengzhou are so poor that the people are turning against each other, yet he's still bestowing awards and conferring titles on a motley crew of ministers for his court. If we aren't doing business with Chazhou, we can do it with them. The others laughed. Shun Zichuan said, Yu Jing is truly from the Chief Surveillance Bureau. Seeing as Yu Xiaozai did not comprehend, Kong Ling said, when you see others conducting themselves with such behavior, you think about impeachment, forgetting that they're impoverished to the extent that they'd turn against one another. So how would they have the money to buy grains from us? Human trafficking is rampant in Fanzhou, and traffickers are running amok all around. If we have them purchase the grains, they might even use children to barter. These people are incorrigible. It filled Zhou Gui with contempt just to bring up this subject. This is something that has to be combated, but the source is still at Mount Luo. As for King Yi, he can't die no matter what. Yao Wenyu relaxed a little and revealed a smile. He is currently our barrier in the south. Without him, we will come face to face with Qi Zhuyin. Speaking of Qi Zhuyin, Yu Xiaozai rolled up his sleeves slightly. This reminds me of Qi Xiu. I heard some news. During the wedding ceremony when 3rd Missy Hua married over, the old commander saw what an unparalleled beauty his new wife was, and in a moment of happiness, he collapsed. Zhou Gui was stunned. Collapsed? Yu Xiaozai continued, he had a stroke. Whether Qi Xiu had a genuine stroke or a bogus one, this incident made it clear that he would not be sharing a room with Hua Xiangyi. The Empress Dowager got the in-laws relationship she wanted with Qidong, but she had no way to take it any further. If Hua Xiangyi did not beget an heir, Qi Zhuyin would retain her position as the commander-in-chief. With her stepmother in her hands, she had every reason to suppress and hold her other brothers in check. Man proposes, God disposes. Zhou Gui lamented. It's fortunate that Qi Zhuyin is not a man. They laughed and chatted about something else. Kong Ling and Yu Xiaozai had only just returned today, so Shun Zichuan could not really let them sit and chat the entire night. At around the hour of Chou, he dismissed them. Zhou Gui personally saw Kong Ling back to his courtyard and gave him a brief and concise account of the screening incident on their way over. Finally, he said, we executed an advisor who took bribes and kept the peace in the Yamen until now. But rumors keep popping up recently, saying that the vice commander came to Tsizhou to coerce me. Can you believe this? Alas, I can't eat or sleep well these few days, worried that these words will make their way to the vice commander's ears and cause misunderstandings between us. Kong Ling held the umbrella and said, I reminded you a long time ago that the address of prefectural prefect should be done away with. If this matter had played out before someone who is over-suspicious and distrustful by nature, you and I would have long lost the trust of the vice commander. But I, Zhou Gui said anxiously, don't know what to change it to. It doesn't matter what you change it to. What's important is the attitude. Kong Ling tilted the umbrella to allow Zhou Gui to raise up the lantern. Sizhou has already established itself. Naturally, it can no longer leave this matter ambiguous. You may not intend it that way, but you won't be able to hold up against repeated rumors, so distinguish between master and subordinate clearly as soon as possible and make it clear to the others as well that Sizhou has already changed masters. During their discussion, both men had already gone up the step. The attendants followed behind them. Before Kong Ling stepped onto the walkway, he looked back and motioned for them to slow down and not to follow too close. It's not appropriate to call him the Provincial Administration Commissioner, and it's not appropriate to call him the Viceroy either. Think of one for me, Zhou Gui said after him. And I can get it settled tomorrow morning. Those are all titles designated by Kudu. Of course, they aren't appropriate. Kong Ling could not think of one at such short notice either. He stood for a moment, then said with a headache, Shen Wei was the Prince of Jianxing, but he has been stripped of his noble rank and title. We mustn't allow this relationship to be associated with the vice commander anymore. Both men stood side by side in the chilly night, with the wind rustling past their clothes. It was so freezing that both men shivered simultaneously. Kong Ling was tired and cold, and so he chased Zhou Gui off. Go back and think of one yourself. 2 days later, Zhou Gui submitted a document with the request to change Vice Commander to Prefectural Lord. 3. He initially meant to address him as Lord Shun, but the word Shun was associated with Shen Wei, so it was revised to the prefectural in prefectural prefect. The word prefectural was flexible. It could progress in tiers according to their future expansion in the region, making it convenient to make changes again. This was the first time Sizhou explicitly recognized Shen Zichuan as the one who reigned supreme in Sizhou. Meanwhile, Zhou Gui demoted himself back into his original position and became a subordinate of Shen Zichuan. Once this matter was made public, King Yi of Fanzhou was the first one to get anxious. He repeatedly issued several notices angrily denouncing Zhou Gui for defecting to the traitor. But Sizhou now had Gao Zongxiong, an eloquent writer of quick wit and great speed, who could twist the narrative in their favor. At the same time he condemned King Yi for his heartlessness in disregarding the lives and deaths of the commoners in Fanzhou by carrying out wasteful large-scale construction of extravagant buildings for his enjoyment. He also composed a ballad for distribution to the 4 prefectures east of Zhongbua, singing the story of how Shen Zichuan had traveled thousands of li to deliver grains but had instead gotten injured, so much that it moved all the listeners to tears. The more that rumor spread, the more exaggerated it became. By the time it reached Xiao Fengshu's ears, it had already become seriously wounded and almost broke an arm. Xiao Fengshu got a fright and went to grab up a diligent Xiao Qie in the middle of the night to ask, "He broke an arm?" Xiao Qie, who had been continuously running errands for half a month, had only just fallen asleep when his old man yanked him up. He was still half asleep, so Xiao Fengshu shook him and asked his question again. Annoyed by the shaking, Xiao Qie asked in a hoarse voice, Who broke an arm?" Xiao Fengshu said, "Shen Zichuan." Chapter 161. Sunset Glow. Chapter 161. Sunset Glow. Xiao Qie felt as though he had been doused with a bucket of icy water that not only sobered him up but also caused his hairs to stand on end. He sat up and stared at Xiao Fengshu for a moment, yet his mind was blank. It was as if he had been punched so hard by someone that even the insides of his chest cavity were a rotten mess. He abruptly pushed Xiao Fengshu aside and got off the couch to put on his boot. But he knocked against the corner of the table and almost couldn't get up. Where in the hell were those damn boots? Chen Yang and Gu Jin were initially standing outside the tent to keep watch for the night when they heard the sound of the flap being lifted and saw Xiao Qie stumbling out like a wandering soul with one foot stepping down on the back of a boot and the other stepping on the ground. He did not even have his outer robes on as he went over to undo Lang Tao Xuejin's reins. Gu Jin was the quickest to react. He strode a step out to tug at the reins and called out in an urgent voice, "Master!" Chen Yang followed closely behind, intending to head inside to look for his robes and boot. Xiao Fengshu bent over to step outside and asked in puzzlement, "You didn't know? Didn't this happen a long time ago? When he went to Chaozhou?" Chen Yang observed Xiao Fengshu's expression, and realization suddenly dawned on him. He slapped his forehead and turned around to shout, "Chaozhou! Master, it's Chaozhou! Young master is fine!" These shouts were so strikingly loud that they shocked Xiao Qie's startled soul back into his body. He turned around and made a beeline for Xiao Fengshu, so agitated that his eyes had gone red. When he came to Xiao Fengshu, he spun around on the spot once before he finally wiped at his face and said, "Good grief, father dearest!" The scabs on Shen Zichuan's palm had fallen off, leaving only a scar behind. As soon as the 8th month passed, the rain in Cizhou ceased. The frost intensified, and the weather grew even colder. Yao Wenyu, having caught a cold in recent days, remained indoors with the hand warmer in hand and rarely ventured outdoors. Shen Zichuan still had Fei Xing following him around. Contrary to expectations, Li Xiong hardly mentioned Lei Jingzhe again. "Is Han Jin still in prison?" Shen Zichuan drank his medicine and asked Fei Xing as he stood by the window. Fei Xing answered, "He's still there. Master is benevolent not to kill him, yet he keeps raising a hue and cry the whole day without so much a sign of repentance." Shen Zichuan gripped the porcelain bowl in his hand and looked at the pattern for a while before he said, "He's Han Cheng's younger brother." Fei Xing lowered his eyes for no reason and shivered. Han Cheng executed Qi Hualien right there on the street. Based on what Fei Xing had figured out regarding Shen Zichuan's temper, the reason Shen Zichuan had kept Han Jin alive without killing him was not to coerce Kudu at all, but to retain him for a bigger purpose. Fei Xing did not dare to guess. He had no wish to guess either. As a guard, he was Shen Zichuan's dagger. Shen Zichuan's wish was his command. Shen Zichuan raised his eyes and looked out of the window at the cold rays of sunlight on the ground, which left trails of tear stains through the frost. He let out an inexplicable smile and said, "Release him." Fei Xing acknowledged the order. Shen Zichuan added, "Get him a bath and a change of clothes, then give him a meal and a soft couch. There is no need for him to do anything. Just let him play to his heart's content." Fei Xing did not dare to object and merely uttered his acknowledgement again before taking his leave. The moment he left, Qiao Tianya lifted the curtain and entered. Letter from Li Bei. Qiao Tianya set the letter on Shen Zichuan's table. It was sent post-haste. Must be something master needs to be informed of. "Is Yuanzhua doing better?" Shen Zichuan asked as he opened the letter. Before Qiao Tianya could answer, he saw Shen Zichuan's stunned expression as he reread the letter several times. "It's about the frontier trade market in winter." Shen Zichuan paused for a moment. "I'm going to the battlegrounds in person to have a face-to-face discussion with the Prince of Li Bei." The weather in Li Bei was capricious. The remaining clear, sunny weather of autumn was few and far between, but once it made its appearance, it would get so hot that it made one want to strip. Xiao Qie returned to the battleground again at the end of the 8th month, and did not leave again for the time being. After that defeat, he had never taken a break. Whether it was to head north to transport military supplies, or going west to contact dying, he was the one who led his men to make the trip. It was as if his rough edges had been completely tempered down by Xiao Fengshu to the point that he was starting to willingly serve as a young general in charge of military supplies. When Chen Yang went to fetch water, he saw Xiao Qie standing on the withered and yellow grassland training a horse. The keyword was training, but in truth, Xiao Qie was a lot more gentle. That horse, snow-white all over with a patch of black on its chest, was the horse Luigi wanted to keep for Xiao Qie's wife. When Xiao Qie had been running errands for the last month, he brought it out with him, wanting to tame it himself. Xiao Fengshu rode his horse over from the other end, and Meng came swooping down in the wind and brushed past Xiao Fangxiu with a swoosh. Then it took off again along the grass and soared into the air, where it spun around once before flying away. Xiao Fangxiu dismounted and threw the reins to the deputy general behind him. He took off his helmet, spat out the dust in his mouth, and narrowed his eyes to look at Xiao Qie. After a while, he removed his heavy armor and took off the saddle on the back of his horse. He then flipped atop it once more and beckoned to Xiao Qie from a distance away. Zhuo Qianxiu leaned over the railing, his white hair fluttering in the wind as he watched father and son side by side. Wu Ziyu ran a few steps closer and stepped up the railing to straddle over it. Behind him, the Libei armored cavalry and imperial army came up and crowded around them on this side of the railing so closely that they were all packed like sardines. It was so squeezed that Tantai, who could not free his hands, so he craned his neck and yelled, "What's this about?" Wu Ziyu held up a steamed bun and shouted at the top of his hoarse voice over the din, "If the second young master wins today, the convoy squad will be the champions this month. They will even have to give us 2 more scoops for our meals." On seeing this, Zhuo Qianxiu said with a laugh, "It will take a few years more before Yi will defeat his old man. The second young master will not let us down." Tantai who shouted defiantly as he wiped the sweat that had trickled down onto his cheek. It was so scorching hot that his face was tanned and flushed. Zhuo Qianxiu asked, "What if his lordship wins?" Chen Yang was just about to say something when he heard Tantai who say in a booming voice, "Then we will run along the grassland and bark as we run." Wu Ziyu and Gu Jin, who were behind him, promptly leaped up to shut his mouth up. Zhuo Qianxiu did not let the opportunity slip. "Fine. Yi, you heard that? If you lose to your father today, your whole squad will have to go woof woof." Xiao Qie lifted his finger and whistled, and Lang Tao Shui Jin circled over to his side. He mounted the horse and asked Xiao Fangxiu, "Where to?" Xiao Fangxiu seemed hesitant as he parroted, "Where to?" Before the words had fully left his mouth, he had already spurred his horse on ahead. The imperial army booed in unison. Tantai who struggled to free his mouth and exclaimed, "How can his lordship cheat?" Lang Tao Shui Jin shot forward like a black arrow leaving the bowstring, and the wind started rustling in an instant. The sun in the clear skies on the horizon was blinding, and the back views of father and son as they rode their horse were almost identical. Meng suddenly broke through the clouds and went all out to chase after them, sticking closely right behind Xiao Qie as it looked down upon that pair of arrows, one in front and one at the back. Blades of grass went flying all over as horses' hooves trampled over them, while the wind stirred up the endless expanse of luxuriant grass, sending them swaying in one direction. They rode amidst it like a duo of big and small stars shooting into the waves of the ocean, leaving a long trail in their wake among the grasslands. Xiao Qie gazed at Xiao Fangxiu's back as he listened to the soughing of the wind. Xiao Fangxiu was not old yet. How could he be old? He looked so robust and strong, no different than he had been 20 years ago. As long as he raised both arms, he could lift both sons, laughing on the grasslands as he tossed them in turn until they cried. Xiao Qie gradually caught up to him. Lang Tao Shui Jin was far more sturdy and younger than that horse beneath Xiao Fangxiu. It charged forth, full of vigor, its eyes staring fixedly ahead as if nothing could stop it. Gradually, both men came to ride neck to neck with one another, both riding until they were drenched in sweat. The sun blazed overhead, searing their backs. This was perhaps the last sunny sky with a scorching sun in Libei this year. There was a stone monument at the finishing point, with the names of the Libei armored cavalry who had died in battle the past year engraved on it, along with the falcons that had fallen with them and the battle steeds that had carried them. At the very last moment when father and son were about to reach, Meng beat them to it and darted over. It circled once before landing on the stone monument, thereby winning first place. "The falcon is mine." Xiao Qie slowed down and said, "So I win. The land is mine." Xiao Fangxiu came to a stop and turned around to face Xiao Qie while pointing at his feet. I was here 800 years earlier than you. Xiao Qie apathetically ignored this statement. They dismounted. The sun was already on its downward descent in the west. Xiao Fengshu headed up the stone steps and stood before the stone monument, then reached out to wipe away the dust on it. The wind was strong here. It sent his hair fluttering and tousled up the hair on his temples, revealing some streaks of white. He said, "Herein lie my brothers." Xiao Qie came up behind him and stood beside Xiao Fengshu. 10 years ago, I brought your eldest brother here. Xiao Fengshu pointed at a certain spot. There was a lad here by the rather unique name of Suaning. He was the same age as your brother. Old names on this stone monument would be scrapped off every year and filled in with new ones. This signified that generation after generation of the Libe armored cavalry all existed here, and it also signified that generation after generation of the Libe armored cavalry had vanished here. It was here the stone monument, with its back to the Hongyan Mountains, lay in eternal rest. They were the wind of the Hongyan Mountains, and at the same time, the stars of the Hongyan Mountains. I want to be here. Xiao Qie pointed in the center. The place is big, the location is good, and you can look far out into the distance. That's my spot. Xiao Fengshu said pettily. I want all the spots here. What about my mother? Xiao Qie turned his head aside to scrutinize Xiao Fengshu. You left her alone in dying. Xiao Fengshu didn't respond. He gazed past the stone monument to look at the Hongyan Mountains. Then, as if dazzled by the setting sun, he turned around and looked in the direction of dying. He could barely open his eyes from the wind. We can look at each other from afar, eyes to eyes, forever. Xiao Qie followed his gaze and looked over. It is here we are born, and it is here we will die worthy deaths. People from Libe lie on the mountains and rivers with their faces to the blazing sun. Men or women, the bones on which the sun shines are all unyielding heroes. Xiao Fengshu opened up his palm, and the wind burst past his palm so softly it felt like the long hair of his wife. This was the only indulgence he had allowed himself in the past decades. One day, I will return to her embrace. Xiao Qie looked at the waves of billowing grass at the other end. It was like a never-ending torrent. The so-called sorrow of parting and joy of reunions of every single person out there was merely a fleeting moment in the timelessness of the universe. In just the blink of an eye, it would disintegrate, and from then on, all would be silent, every vestige of it gone. An encounter was truly a very precious thing. Xiao Fengshu turned around and threw Xiao Qie a punch, then lifted his arms to give Xiao Qie a tight hug. But very quickly, he let go and said, You still need a good several years before you can surpass me. Who knows? Xiao Qie patted his own chest to hint at his height. Xiao Fengshu took a few steps and made as if to pick something off the ground. Having horse dung flung at him had left a shadow over Xiao Qie's heart, and so he promptly turned around and ran. The moment he ran, Xiao Fengshu burst out laughing. The wind was still blowing as the father and son made their way back, bathed in the evening glow of the setting sun. Dusk was not yet over. As Xiao Qie was drenched in sweat all over, he stripped off his upper garments and stood in the river to bathe. The surface of the water shimmered. As he poured water using the wooden bucket, dancing ripples of golden light covered the muscles on his entire back. Xiao Qie bent over and rinsed his arm guard in the water. The quality iron had been smashed to the point it was no longer usable, but he still did not have it changed. When he took it out of the water, he ripped away the badly worn dogskin rope on it and turned around to say, "Hand me the—" A travel-worn Shen Zichuan stood on the slope by the riverside, the sunset glow spilling over the hems of his robe with bits of grass on it. Xiao Qie missed him so much. And here he stood before Xiao Qie at the very moment the last rays of the setting sun faded away. Chapter 162, Frontier Trade Market. Chapter 162. Frontier Trade Market. The dark blue dome of heaven lay out in a spread behind Shen Zichuan. He lifted his arms to remove his overcoat, exposing the earring on his right ear as he moved. His sleeves slid down to reveal the secured, snow-white sleeves of his inner garment underneath. He was just like a white bird stopping for a rest in this still and silent world, commanding all of Xiao Qia's attention in just a matter of an instant. Xiao Qia did not blink. As he watched Shen Zichuan descend the slope in a few steps, he subconsciously opened his arms. The impact when Shen Zichuan rushed into him sent him half a step back, but at the same time, he took all of this white bird into his bosom, embracing him in a tight hug. The swift, running waters of the river crashed into both of their legs, sending up sprays of water. "You scared me." Recovering from his astonishment, Xiao Qia abruptly lifted Shen Zichuan high and laughed as he looked up, "Falling out of the sky the way you did." Shen Zichuan was a little short on breath as he said, "I'm here for an inspection." Xiao Qia lifted his palm to touch Shen Zichuan's cheek, then covered the back of Shen Zichuan's head with it and held him down for a kiss. Dusk closed in on them on all sides, their lips a scenic scene under the dimness. Shen Zichuan's palms slid up to cup both of Xiao Qia's cheeks as he responded to him passionately. The shimmer of water on the river's surface disappeared, and the subsequent, pervading darkness of the night blurred the boundary between heaven and earth. They clung close together ever so intimately, unbosoming themselves of their fervent longing. Xiao Qia kissed him so hard that Shen Zichuan could not help but suck in a breath when they parted and licked the spot that was nearly torn by his bite. "Go ahead and inspect." Xiao Qia laughed. "Come on. I've already stripped for you to inspect all you want." Shen Zichuan put up his arms over Xiao Qia's shoulders and tapped on Xiao Qia's sturdy back with his dangling folding fan. "I disappeared without a trace the moment I got off the horse carriage. His lordship has yet to meet me yet. I'll inspect you tonight." "Oh." Xiao Qia dragged out the word and said with displeasure as he continued to hug him in this posture, "So you're here to see my father." Shen Zichuan swung the folding fan between his fingers and said, "That's something I have to do in passing while I'm at it. My heart is all here." Xiao Qia waded through the river and carried Shen Zichuan towards the riverbank. "I don't believe you." Shen Zichuan felt that Xiao Qia looked too dashing like this. When he landed on the ground, he leaned over to scrutinize him, so Xiao Qia raised his arm and pressed against Shen Zichuan's forehead to put a little more distance between them. "You should have seized the chance while you had it." Xiao Qia picked up his clothes and said, "That's all I'm showing you." Shen Zichuan teased him. "I'm leaving then?" Xiao Qia put on his robe and tilted his head up slightly to say, "Go ahead." Shen Zichuan nodded in understanding and took a few steps backward. Seeing no movement from Xiao Qia, he turned around for real. But who knew? Even before he had the chance to stride a step forward the moment he turned around, Xiao Qia lifted him back and covered his head to kiss him until his waist went numb. This wide robe that cloaked him was filled with Xiao Qia's scent all over, the coolness and refreshingness of which engulfed Shen Zichuan whole. In that meager film of darkness, he revealed his avaricious nature, breathing hotly to seduce Xiao Qia before he finally said into Xiao Qia's ear, "Your father coming." The group of well-intentioned guards who had been squatting behind the slope started to cough violently in unison. Xiao Qia pulled back from the brink right in the nick of time and tore off the robe in a fit of pique. Xiao Fengshu had long known that Shen Zichuan was here, but he did not communicate this to Xiao Qia. At present, there were plenty of people in the military tent. The commanding generals from Changzhou Camp, Shar Camp, and the three great training divisions of Luyang were all present and were in the midst of discussing the news from Dying. If the Biancha troops don't withdraw, this battle will no doubt last until winter. The commanding general of the Shar Camp was called Jiang Xing, who had been wounded some days back. His shoulders were still bandaged with gauze. He said, "If we are still going to keep up with the fight like this in winter, then the few battalions in the front line will need to consider deploying more military craftsmen. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it in time if we simply rely on the convoy squad to make the deliveries back and forth when the wear and tear of the equipment gets too severe." Deploying more military craftsmen is an option. Zhuqianqiu warmed himself by the fire and said, but the need for military provisions will increase as well. If we transfer all the people from dying to the front line, there will be no one back at home to cultivate the fields at the beginning of spring next year. Now that Li Bei had lost the granaries in Jueshi, its military provisions in the future were cut by half. They all had to rely on the military fields in Li Bei to survive. This was a matter that pertained to their success or failure on the battlefield. As the hereditary prince suggested, Zhao Hui said, building a new supply camp behind Shar camp will allow us to mutually guard and assist the Bianbui camp to the south, as well as meet the needs of the battlefields even faster than before. In times of emergency during the war, the territory can scrimp and save to supply the front line. Winter is right around the corner, and the coats have yet to be distributed. Jiang Xing knew everyone was in a difficult position, so it would not do for him to go too far with his words. He frowned worriedly in silence for a moment. The hereditary prince's consort is leading the old and weak, women and children to hasten production for the winter coats back in dyeing, and even the cotton used to make them was given to us by Luoxia Pass. We are in for a tough time this year. If we can't survive this winter, we can forget about discussing anything for next year. You are a veteran general. Xiao Fengshu drank hot milk and said, so why lose heart? The men on the front line aren't totally wiped out yet. If it's rough going for us, it'll be even tougher on the 12 tribes of Bianxia. Amur has still yet to make it as their great lord. There are only 6 tribes under him that can be truly said to have pledged allegiance to him. The remaining ones merely want to have a share of the spoils and take risks with him. But when it really comes down to the last critical juncture, they might not necessarily be willing to stake it all with him. Bianxia is gaining so much momentum this year, Zhao Hui said. They must have come prepared. No doubt they have been planning for it for a long time. Zhuqianqiu turned both of his palms over and pondered it over for a moment before continuing. In the 3rd year of Xianda, he colluded with others from within and from without to break through the Zhongbua's defenses line. It went all too smoothly that time, giving him a taste of sweet victory. That's why it comes as a surprise now that he's concentrating his attacks on a tough nut like Li Bei. But from this we can tell that he is indeed now harboring the intent to invade Dazhou, and he wants to first smash down this side of the wall that is Li Bei in order not to repeat the same mistake. Someone out there is supplying grains to Amur. Xiao Fengshu's eyes were sharp and cutting. Jiming was out of commission after the military provisions case, and Amur instantly transferred Hassan north. I don't believe it if you tell me he did not know about it in advance. So we should thank our lucky stars that Kudu did not have Li Bei's military defense map, considering that Amur's inside contact is still hiding in Dazhou. Yi rebelled at the start of spring this year. Was it a bad thing? No, he did good. If Li Bei was still under Kudu's control, this battle would no longer be just a matter of worrying over provisions. As the saying goes, it is easy to dodge a spear in the open, but hard to ward off an arrow in the dark. It's too dangerous. No more eunuchs coming over to inspect the military and breathe down our necks. Jiang Xing finally smiled a little and said as he shook his head, this battle is really a comfortable one to fight. There are ways to resolve the issue of provisions next year. Xiao Fengshu set down his bowl. And it's for this specific purpose I've found someone who can offer us a way. Zhuqianqiu laughed and rose to his feet. All right then. I'll invite this little buddy in. Wu Ziyu wanted to take a look at Shun Zichuan, but it was inappropriate for him to be too brazen. He followed behind Tantai Hu and asked, "This the one?" Tantai Hu looked back and whispered, "Just address him as young master later." Wu Ziyu saw Shun Zichuan listening to Fei Xing. He could not tell if Shun Zichuan was happy or not from his side profile, but his entire person was like a brilliantly colored painting just by sitting there alone. His skin was fair, yet his facial features were so ravishing it was enthralling, so much that one dared not shift their eyes away, even though looking at him for too long would inexplicably give one the chills. But this chill was not obvious. It merely ran up one's spine, so cold it gave no indications of its advance. By the time realization dawned, the person would have already subconsciously sensed danger and felt the urge to dodge his cutting brilliance. Ding Tao shot his mouth off and popped out his head to whisper, "See that jade earring? Our master polished it personally. Young master wears it every day." That jade earring adorned his right ear, and it was still debatable whether Shen Zichuan embellished it or it embellished Shen Zichuan. It was like a needless warning that concealed Xiao Qie's undisguised possessiveness behind that smoothness, making it clear to all that no one else, other than Xiao Qie, could touch Shen Zichuan. Wu Ziyu had only just burrowed his way among them and had still yet to decide what demeanor he should adopt to greet and welcome Shen Zichuan. But seeing as everyone around him looked as they usually did, he did the same as well, his prying gaze warded off by that jade earring. By the time Shen Zichuan was able to meet Xiao Fangxiu, it was already nearly the hour of Zi. Chen Yang lifted the flap for him to let him enter. Xiao Fangxiu was initially sitting with his leg propped up, but on seeing the white figure entering, he suddenly sat straight up. But then, he felt he was really being too unnatural, so he attempted to cover it up by propping his hand on his knee to appear more imposing, only to look all the more conspicuous as he looked at Shen Zichuan without so much a smile. "Sorry to have kept you waiting in the tent for so long." Zhuo Qianxiu guided Shen Zichuan. "It's been a tough journey here, hasn't it? Come have a meal with us first. We'll talk as we eat." With that, he turned his head and signaled to Xiao Fangxiu with his eyes. Xiao Fangxiu scrutinized Shen Zichuan. He still remembered this face, but his aura was completely poles apart from the person he had seen 1 year ago. He thought, well then, he's truly too damn stunning. "Sit," Xiao Fangxiu said coolly. Gu Jin served the tea, and Chen Yang brought out the dishes. The meal was simple, consisting of a large bowl of lamb stew, tea blended with fresh milk, piping hot flatbread, and commonly seen cabbages and green vegetables at the front lines. Shen Zichuan stared at the spread before him. They clearly overestimated him. Zhuo Qianxiu gestured for Shen Zichuan to dig in. He tore apart the flatbread and said, "There isn't much good stuff here. We wanted to welcome you with a meal, but there isn't much here, so this will have to do. If we can get a truce during the new year, we will surely not put you through such aggrievement when we are back in dying." Shen Zichuan found the word, aggrievement, strange. He was here to discuss the frontier trade market and the use of paths with Xiao Fangxiu. Xiao Fangxiu was willing to meet him, so no matter how he looked at it, the word aggrievement should not be part of the picture at all. "It's been half a year since we parted. When we met in Kudu the last time, you were not this thin." Zhuo Qianxiu said, "Is your Shifu well?" Without putting down his chopsticks, Shen Zichuan nodded in reply. "Shifu has been in good health lately and leads a carefree life in Suzhou. He often misses you. Before I came, he specially instructed me to deliver a letter on his behalf." He then looked back and shouted, "Fei Xing." Fei Xing handed the letter over to Chen Yang. As Zhuo Qianxiu and Shen Zichuan exchanged pleasantries for a few moments, Xiao Fangxiu sliced the lamb meat with a dagger and said, "Are you here to discuss the trade market with me?" "That's right," Shen Zichuan replied, "and the matter of the bridle paths as well. Access to Li Bei's bridle paths will not be given for free." Xiao Fangxiu placed the sliced lamb meat onto his plate. "It's all good as long as you can afford to pay. However, the mutual trade market is not for external loan. If your lordship doesn't permit external loan of the trade market, it will be left vacant this year." Shen Zichuan sampled the flatbread before continuing, "The war this year is intense, and the grasslands of the Huiyan tribe have been commandeered for use by the Hanxi tribe. They're now waiting to trade their remaining cattle and sheep for grain at the trade market to get through winter. If the trade market doesn't open up, then thousands of people will starve to death in the heavy snow. Li Bei's willingness to vacate land for the Huiyan tribe to get through winter is already a magnanimous show of benevolence. They are well aware that we are in a difficult predicament this year. Xiao Fangxiu wiped the dagger clean and looked towards Shen Zichuan. Do you know what it means to let you have the trade market? It means that your people can shuttle in and out of Li Bei this winter. It's currently wartime. What if bandits of Mount Luo who have defected to the Biantia people infiltrate their way in? Dare you bear the consequences then? I dare not, Shen Zichuan locked eyes with Xiao Fangxiu. That's why I will eliminate all possibilities of this what if. Xiao Fangxiu tossed the dagger into the tray at the side. I don't believe that. Then how about I hand the authority to inspect over to your lordship? Shen Zichuan grasped his handkerchief and slowly let out a smile. Cizhou will provide the grains. As for how to send it over, Li Bei will have the final say. What do you want in exchange? Xiao Fangxiu asked in a quiet voice. This transaction is not at all a good deal for you. I want a road in exchange. Shen Zichuan stretched out his index finger and drew a line in the air. A commercial trade road that can run through the entire northeastern territories of Dazhou, one that will give Li Bei and Cizhou the opportunity to establish a long-term relationship with one another. Xiao Fangxiu did not respond. The flap of the tent on the other side lifted, and Xiao Qie entered. Chapter 163. Boat on River. Chapter 163. Boat on River. Shen Zichuan's gaze roamed over Xiao Qie's body like an imperceptible tease. It lasted merely a split second, so fast that Xiao Qie could only catch that last modicum of it. What benefits will Li Bei get out of it if I let you use the frontier trade market? Xiao Fangxiu wiped his hands clean. Li Bei isn't dependent on the trade road for survival. In the past, the noble clans adopted the strategy of befriending distant states while attacking one nearby one in order to hold Li Bei in check. This rendered the southern side of Li Bei powerless and left Li Bei isolated and cut off from assistance. I'm now willing to be the link connecting Zhongbua and Li Bei again, as well as serve as a buffer zone between Li Bei and Qidong. Shen Zichuan said, Li Bei has to fight a protracted war with Biantia, and it'll be too dangerous if it can't be allies with Zhongbua. Xiao Qie sat down next to Xiao Fangxiu. After Chen Yang presented him with a new pair of chopsticks, he picked up a piece of lamb meat from the plate to eat. Xiao Fangxiu glanced at Xiao Qie out of the corner of his eye, then looked at Shen Zichuan and said, You are not the Prince of Jianxing, Shen Wei. Your words still don't carry enough weight to represent the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua. I know you wrestled away Zhou Gui's Cizhou using transiting through as an excuse, and you also subdued Luo Mu's Chazhou into submission under the pretext of delivering grains. But King Yi of the 2 prefectures of Fanzhou and Dengzhou and the bandits of Mount Luo of the 2 prefectures of Dunzhou and Duanzhou aren't under your control. Shen Zichuan already had a scheme in mind. King Yi is a commoner forced into rebellion by the bandit. The 2 prefectures of Fanzhou and Dengzhou have less than 30,000 troops. He can't beat the Biantia cavalry to the east, and he doesn't dare to face up against Qi Juin directly to the south. He can only establish a small imperial court in Fanzhou and attempt to join forces with the bandits from Mount Luo. This person is just like a paper tiger, not significant enough to fear. The bandits of Mount Luo are presently mired in internal strife and torn apart by disunity. They are no longer a threat to Zhongbua. Besides, neither of them will negotiate with Li Bei. Only Cizhou comes with a sincere heart. Given that the trade route between Huaizhou, Cizhou, and Chazhou has already taken shape, Cizhou is able to bypass Kudu to conduct monetary transactions with Jueshi. If Li Bei so needs, Cizhou can supply the northeast provisions bridle path. Filthy rich. Xiao Fangxiu and Zhuo Qianqiu thought at the same time. To supply the northeast provisions bridle path was to supply Li Bei with military provisions. Shen Zichuan's greatest assets in Jueshi lay in the Shi clan stores. He had long decided to continue using the Northeast Provisions bridle path when he left Kudu. The military provisions case brought the scalping of grains in Jueshi to light, but it also allowed Shun Zichuan to lock on to a loophole. Shi Hongxian was held back by the Hua clan of Diqing to the north when he had to go through the Hezhou waterways while dealing in grains in the past. But now that Shun Zichuan had Huaizhou, he would be able to purchase grains from Jueshi. But at the same time, Shun Zichuan changed the subject. I hope the newly established garrison troops of the 6 prefectures can receive guidance from the Libei armored cavalry and buy battle steeds from Hongyan Mountains in the future. This time, not only Xiao Fengshu turned his gaze to him, even Xiao Qia did so. You want to establish a cavalry too? Xiao Fengshu's interest was piqued. In Zhongbua, along Chashi River? Shun Zichuan drank the hot milk to warm himself a little. Duanzhou needs a cavalry. Zhongbua had no grasslands, so the garrisons of the 6 prefectures of Zhongbua were mainly infantries. However, Zhongbua's terrains did not enjoy the same natural geographical advantage as Qidong, which had the 2 checkpoints of Tianfei Watchtower and Suotian Pass for protection. The terrain along Chashi River was a vast, open expanse, and the line of defense Duanzhou set up there could not withstand the repeated assaults of the Biancha cavalry. Zhongbua had long needed to rebuild the Chashi military defense. My elder brother's name was Ji Mu. He was a squad commander in the Duanzhou garrison troops when the troops of Zhongbua suffered a defeat. Shun Zichuan paused for a moment. He was familiar with the area along the Chashi River. Like Libei, it's a wide expanse of flatlands. The defense camps established at that time did not have the beacon towers of the Bianjuan commandery that stretched for tens of thousands of li, nor did they have the Falcon's reconnaissance of Libei. When they were breached one after another by the Biancha cavalry, there was no time at all for them to pass on military intelligence. This was one of the reasons for the fall of Duanzhou. The public roads relay horses could not outrun the Biancha cavalry, and they were all slaughtered en route to their destinations. With military information delayed in transit, the various cities in the rear could not receive any update. What greeted them when the city's gates were broken down were the Biancha cavalry's scimitars right in their faces, and this was followed right after by the massacre of the cities. Ji Mu had died with a grievance. All the 40,000 garrison soldiers in the Chashi sinkhole died unjust deaths. They had the determination to die protecting their homes and country, but they never got the opportunity. Heavy snow blanketed the Chashi sinkhole, and from then on, the men of Zhongbua became the stray dogs of Dazhou. Duanzhou needs a light cavalry, Shun Zichuan said firmly. After the defeat of the troops, the area along Chashi River fell into the hands of the Biancha people, and whatever few were left of the Duanzhou's defense camps all fell into disuse. To rebuild them, Duanzhou needs an army of light cavalry. Xiao Fengshu stroked his chin. There are plenty of options if you only want a route to pass on military information efficiently. Re-establish a dense cluster of relay stations along Chashi River and repair the bridle paths as soon as possible, and you can be as swift as you want. But if you want an army of light cavalry that can rival the Biancha cavalry, then Libei can't help you. Zuoqianqiu nodded and said to Shun Zichuan, the Biancha cavalry's strength lies not only in their speed, but also in how far more adept they are on horseback than any of Dazhou's soldiers. This is something that not even the Libei armored cavalry can compare to. Furthermore, a Duanzhou that relinquishes its defenses is akin to an infant in swaddling clothes. Through his peripheral vision, Xiao Fengshu watched Xiao Qia stealthily push that plate of meat with his fingers towards Shun Zichuan. He shifted his foot and stomped on his son's foot under the table. Xiao Qia sucked in a breath and said, I think it's feasible. The hell you know. Xiao Fengshu reproved. Xiao Qia turned his thumb ring around twice. I actually do know something. He looked towards Shun Zichuan again, and felt a very subtle itch when their gazes met. Xiao Qia knew exactly what Shun Zichuan was thinking. Why must this light cavalry compare to the Biancha cavalry? Even if we remove the heavy armors of the Libe armored cavalry, we will not achieve the same results as the Biancha cavalry. Xiao Qia felt a little lazy after eating his fill. Lanzhou still has the imperial bodyguards in his command, and using them for information gathering, data tracking, and record-taking is too much of a waste. But, as long as you pair the imperial bodyguards with the best horses, they'll have a chance to break through Biancha's defenses along Chasha River. How many men are there in the imperial bodyguards? Xiao Fengshu scoffed. Their addition to the battlefield is comparable to a strand of hair on an ox. The imperial bodyguard can always be expanded according to their selection criteria if there aren't enough men. Not only does Lanzhou have the fastest intelligence gatherers in Dazhou, he also possesses assassins who are the most adept in the art of camouflage. Xiao Qia said, "Is having few men a shortcoming? Not always. As a light cavalry of assassins, being small in number is their advantage. Rather than calling them a strand of ox hair, why not call them a piece of steel needle? To use this needle in the right place, and even a vulture will fall." Shen Zichuan was inspired by Xiao Jiming's mode of warfare. If he were to establish camps along the Chasha River that could supply the front line, then he still lacked a military force that could act as a heavy hammer like the Libe armored cavalry. But there was no way the Libe armored cavalry could be replicated, so Shen Zichuan swapped the hammer for a steel needle. Think about it, a sufficiently fortified defense wall that could be built spanning from Dunzhou to Duanzhou. If Shen Zichuan had the infantry shifted behind this wall and transformed into bowmen equipped with additional defensive weapons, then had a troop of light cavalry with eccentric whereabouts placed along the Chasha River, he would possess a bird's-eye panoramic view of everything within and beyond the wall. This cavalry, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them the assassination squad evolved from the imperial bodyguards, would be able to go under disguise. They would remain Shen Zichuan's eyes and ears on the ground, silent and omnipresent. As long as Shen Zichuan so desired, he would be able to hear everything. Zhuo Qianxiu inwardly sucked in a breath of cold air. Having been stationed in Tianfei Watchtower for so many years, he understood best the stealthiness of assassins such as this. This assumption was enough to give one the chills. Silence descended upon the tent. Everyone was waiting for Xiao Fengshu to speak. Xiao Fengshu thought for a long time before he said to Shen Zichuan, "You may trade grains for horses, but if you were to succeed in establishing this light cavalry, don't ever let them take a single step into Libe." He pushed the plate away, propped up his arm on the table, and said to Shen Zichuan with a smile, "Or I'll kill them and kill you." An imposing aura that was all too substantive came bearing down on him, crushing him. Before Xiao Qia could get to open his mouth, Shen Zichuan pressed down on his arm. He stood his own against the weight of the alpha wolf's gaze on him, and, in that long, endless moment, slowly replied, "Deal." Xiao Fengshu bent his finger and flicked it at the rim of the bowl, retracting his imposing aura just as freely as he had released it. When everyone had dispersed, Xiao Fengshu sat by the fire and rotated the dagger to heat it. "It's still not too late." Zhuo Qianxiu sat down, for regrets. Light from the flame cast upon the side of Xiao Fengshu's face. He said, "This lad is too dangerous. You do know who his teacher is, don't you?" Zhuo Qianxiu soothed him. "What's more, he's Ji Gang's disciple. He's really not bad at heart. Don't try to fob me off with that. Even brothers born of the same parents differ from each other. Qi Hualian is not one to keep to his own devices either." Xiao Fengshu caressed the blade with his thumb. "Cracks abound everywhere in the world. Men like this can't fight battles, yet they can come out on top to stand upon a mountain of corpses amidst a sea of blood." After a long period of silence, Zhuo Qianxiu asked, "Then why are you still willing to agree to it?" Xiao Fengshu looked at that sliding glint of the blade as light from the flame bathed it in red. He examined his own reflection on the blade under the small crackling of the bonfire. Eventually, he said, "My son has himself made into a lock." Shen Zichuan undid the clasps on his coat as he faced the candle flame, looking a little weary. He had not had this kind of feeling for a very long time, the sense of setback from being exposed for his bluff. Shen Zichuan had never told anyone about Duanzhou's light cavalry, not even Qi Huilian and Shao Qi. Many of what he did in the past had their roots in impure motive. As long as he got his hands on it, he would fully exploit it. He called all of those hypocrisies, and they were even more atrocious before Shao Qi had come into the picture. That was why he could not, dared not tell anyone. Shen Zichuan loosened his collar, as if he would be able to breathe by doing so. The sounds of footsteps rang out outside the military tent. Shao Qi spoke to the guards, and Shen Zichuan stopped what he was doing when he heard his voice. Just then, Shao Qi lifted the flap and entered. Yi. Shen Zichuan did not turn around and merely inclined his head slightly to the side as he called out to him. Shao Qi pressed his chest against him from behind. Shen Zichuan melted under Shao Qi's breathing, and the feeling earlier eased up some. As they nuzzled each other intimately, the temperature gradually rose, so hot was it that they were both sweating. Shen Zichuan breathed out hot air. It was as if Shao Qi's kiss had scalded him. He put on an expression similar to pain, but the corners of his eyes brimmed with pleasure as he indulged and lost himself within. He was fond of Shao Qi's kisses. Shao Qi took hold of both of Shen Zichuan's hands and brought them behind the latter, as though he was binding him up. He extinguished the candle, and amid the remaining wisps of white smoke, edged along the nape of that neck where he buried his own despondency. Lanzhou. Shao Qi savored the word in his mouth. All of a sudden, the table was swept clean. Shen Zichuan wanted to reach for the edge of the table, but his hands were bound and grasped so tightly by Shao Qi. Shen Zichuan tilted his head up until he could see the side of Shao Qi's face. "Kiss me." Shen Zichuan mouthed silently. But Shao Qi did not. He remained where he was a small distance apart and did not move again.